What's up? What's up? What's up? Still getting set up here. Just give me a moment. There we go. Okay, yeah, I make sure I got the right mic running. Turns out Sweet Anita's on stream right now. Her streams are so entertaining. Like, she's hilarious. She's doing like this whole multiple days of Gothmas thing. I could just show y'all. Hold on. Which one is it? I think it's this one. Yeah. Where is it?
We got those at church.
Hey.
Grab his dick and twist it!
I appreciate the invitation, but I think I'll decline. I also have these cool
Yeah, her shirt is absolutely, her stuff is absolutely great.
They're wispy and they're kind of like similar color to my these bits, but they're a bit thin and I'd have to tuck my ear behind for you to see it. I don't know how visible they are and how good they'd look. Oh, we also got this at church.
Alright, we're good.
I'm loving the rings.
There we go. Good stuff to have in the background,
So,
you know?
and then I have these which are more gold but also more visible. They're like plants.
So I really like how this turned out.
But we were gonna do the faux nose ring, weren't we?
We're gonna copy
See,
the same
I don't know that I actually have a
style,
nose ring
the same
that would
template for the
work.
other ones.
Like, because I have ones that are rings, but like,
Alright, so I'm gonna come off first. What? No, none of the rest that I follow is actually streaming now.
ow, this is gonna be so pinchy. Ow, no.
Back to the YouTube.
And after that, things didn't go too well for them. The case got back to England eventually, but there it sat ready to curse the country. To cut a long story short, everyone who bought it or went near it died, or so we're told. In 1912, a rich American was said to have bought the case, and he didn't believe in all those silly superstitious tales. He wanted to ship the thing over to the US, on board the Titanic. It's a fact that the tabloid creator Steed wrote about what later became known as the unlucky mummy, and so people put two and two together and got five, saying that because Steed died, the mummy must have been on that ship. It wasn't. Still, one of the survivors on the Titanic had a story to tell. He was back on dry land. He described how Steed had been telling people on the ship how the mummy's curse was going to destroy London. This made headlines. The Washington Post ran one that went, "Ghost of the Titanic, vengeance of hoodoo mummy followed the man who wrote its history." So much for the tabloids being the only ridiculous news sources. Let's get two things straight. No mummy case was on that ship. It's in the British Museum as you watch this. Steed was patently crazy, but we'll forgive him for giving away his life jacket. So if a mummy mad that her coffin had been plundered didn't do it, then who would make an obvious next choice to blame for the sinking of the Titanic? God. It was God that did it, but not the...
Experience your new PC by Digital Storm. A faster workflow, allowing you to do more in less time. Pro performance, powered by the latest new components. An optimized solution built for your software applications. Learn more at digitalstorm.com.
Yo, all these pictures of Tina worked out so well. I actually got more work off of that.
To succeed in the markets is more difficult than the Olympics.
People play games like GameStop or the flavor of the moment.
The goal is not your personal excitement.
Wall Street makes things very complicated, but it doesn't have to be that way.
People come to me all the time asking, what does the future hold? My answer often surprises them.
That's some crazy information. I don't want to see that right now. I gotta post my TikTok.
Catholic god a Protestant god. You see, the construction number for the Titanic was 401, as you already know, but some people say it had another number on the hull that was 390904. What does that say if you look at it in a mirror? No Pope. The story goes that one day someone in the yard was straightening his tie in the mirror and he saw the number. My God, he thought it's a sign that that ship is doomed. The poor Catholics that built the ship in the Belfast shipyard were sure that it meant the Titanic was in for a rough ride. The truth is that the number never actually appeared on the ship. Another fact is that the people who worked in the shipyard weren't Catholic but Protestant. It's also believed that the no Pope rumor didn't start circulating until the 50s. So, if it wasn't the fault of the Germans, or JP Morgan, or a mummy, or God, then who could it have been? Well, we can blame the iceberg if we want to be very boring and factual, but we can also add something to the story. You might not know that one of the seamen that was supposed to sail on the Titanic was named David Blair, or Davy to his friends. He was one of the guys that sailed on the ship when it was making its first trial runs. But just before it took that perilous journey over the ocean, he was assigned a different job. He was really bummed about it too, writing to his sister saying, "This is a magnificent ship. I feel very disappointed I'm not to make her first voyage." Blair got off lucky, but did he do something naughty after getting the snub? It's a fact that when he left the ship, he took some keys with him, keys that opened a locker to where a pair of binoculars were kept. This was the only locker up where the crow's nest was, and that's the place you really need binoculars when you're looking for things like, I don't know, icebergs. Two of the lookouts actually survived, and when Congress asked them if binoculars would have helped them to better see that iceberg, both men said yes, most likely. Congress asked, "How much sooner do you think you'd have seen it?" To which one man replied, "Enough to get out of the way." So there you go. Human error was likely to blame. We're sorry to disappoint you. The theories are much more fun. On the Ides of March, or March 15th, a great Roman man called Julius Caesar was assassinated when he was stabbed an estimated 23 times. Many more influential people around the world would meet a similar fate in the years to come. Those who fell to the hand of an assassin or assassins include the great Mahatma Gandhi, John F. Kennedy, and the man suspected of killing him, Lee Harvey Oswald. Then you have the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, something blamed for kicking off World War I. President Abraham Lincoln took a bullet to the head, while Martin Luther King Jr. was also assassinated the American way, killed with a firearm. Today we're going to introduce you to someone you might not have heard about, but you should have. His story is fascinating and his death is intriguing. This man, known as Ramesses III, was the second pharaoh of the 20th dynasty in Egypt, and his reign lasted from 1186 to 1155 BC. That's a long time ago, but if you want to see what this guy vaguely looked like, you can, because you can search for images of his mummy online. And you know what people are saying about those remains these days? That it looks like old Ramesses had his throat slit. But let's rewind just a little bit. From what we know about the man, he was a good, if not great leader. During his time as pharaoh, what's known as the New Kingdom or Egyptian Empire was coming to an end. As empires always tend to do, it was heading toward decline. After he was gone, the trouble really started. But while he was in charge, he was successful, having beat back Libyan armies twice and making short shrift of the Sea Peoples. These people didn't get into Egypt, but they would attack again. It's said, in all, our hero today and his armies fought them off 3 times. As one historian points out, these fights were big deals. He writes, "It should be stressed that the invasions were not merely military operations, but involved the movements of large populations, by land and sea, seeking new lands to settle. Let's just say Ramesses, having won a trio of invasions, likely won over a lot of people. How do we even know what went down more than 3,000 years ago? We don't really. Not exactly. But historians rely on what the inscriptions say at Ramesses III's Medinet Habu mortuary temple. You can also hear this in something called the Harris Papyrus. As for those who reached my frontier, their seed is not. Their heart and their soul are finished forever and ever. As for those who came forward together on the seas, the full flame was in front of them at the Nile's mouths, while a stockade of lances surrounded them on the shore, prostrated them on the beach, slain and made into heaps from head to tail. Yeah, he messed them up. Okay, so he won battles. But when empires go into decline, it always starts with a lot of infighting, usually peppered with decadence and many bad decisions. We also have to take into account that some of the people he defeated were settled nearby, and this might have led to new states being formed that would lead to the empire's downfall. Egypt had been fighting on land and in the sea. And as you know, especially if you check out our cost of defense shows, constantly being a warlike nation or defending yourself means spending tons of cash. No empire in the past has ever survived overspending when fighting on too many fronts. This economic turmoil took its toll on the normal people, and they had to put up with the ancient form of austerity, which basically meant less grain. When the people suffer, when it looks like there's no way out, usually a bunch of other powerful people get together and start machinating about how to get rid of the failing leader. This is where our conspiracy comes in. We're told that for a long time, no one really knew how exactly Ramesses had been assassinated. Papyrus court documents were found that indeed tell us that a coup had been planned. This is known as the Harem Conspiracy, because the key figures behind the murder were said to be one of Ramesses' second wives and her co-conspirators, because she wanted to put her son, Pentawere, in charge. This is how the tale goes. It was just a normal night in Ramesses' harem, but little did he know that one of his many wives were planning to take him out, as well as his son Ramesses IV, and give power to her child. She had before this enlisted various officials who had said were in on the plan, doubtless worried by the state of the empire. She needed a lot of help though, and even got kitchen staff and other servants in on the action. It's said the most important ally in this assassination was a pantry chef called Pabekamen. You see, not just anyone could walk right into the harem. To get in, Pabekamen had to enlist a few helpers himself, and it was all looking rather like an ancient Egyptian version of Ocean's 11. But given the time, the conspirators also employed those who were able to use black magic to weaken both the pharaoh and the guards around him. It's said that while the actual assassination was in play, someone was casting spells and performing incantations. We cannot verify if this part of the killing process worked, but with modern science, we're sure skeptical. It seems the attack was successful, but there's always been a shade of mystery as to how he actually died. We'll get around to that, but we can say the assassination did work. We might also add that Ramesses IV was not felled, and this spelled trouble for the gang of murderous usurpers. In a document called the Judicial Papyrus of Turin, it's written that people were put on trial and names were revealed. It's also said a number of officials in on the plot had been blackmailed, but that didn't save all of them. That document reads that in all, 27 men and 6 women were convicted of high treason, and another 5 of corruption. It also reads that most of them should be killed, with the document saying that the court was not killing them, but their actions had killed them. It's not known exactly how they were put to death, but we're told that a number of them took their own lives. 3 of them got off lightly too, and they were merely disfigured. Another got an ancient slap on the wrist. The son who would be king, Pentawere, may have killed himself. No one knows for sure, but some documents seem to infer that he was forced to take his own life. The empire was a mess. The pharaoh had been slaughtered. The other main players had either been killed or were perhaps worried about the state things were in. This was the beginning of the Great Descent that led toward the end of the empire. But how did Ramesses die? Did he actually have his throat slit? Live science tells us that researchers had for a long time been mulling over the actual cause of death, with some people saying he was stabbed, slashed, and he died immediately, but other people saying he was hurt but lasted another 3 days. So scientists got a hold of the mummy, but this time they were armed with a computed tomography machine, and they performed what are known as CT scans. The large and deep cut wound in his neck must have been caused by a sharp knife or other blade, said the scientists. They added that it was quite the deep wound, and whoever got Ramesses' neck had severed his large blood vessels as well as his trachea and esophagus. Their conclusion was that there was no way in hell that the great pharaoh did much after this, as such a vicious cut would have killed him almost instantly. That also had another surprise. They found an amulet buried in his throat. This had been buried by bandages, and no one had ever seen it before. Most probably, the ancient Egyptian embalmers tried to restore the wound during mummification by inserting the amulet and by covering the neck with a collar of thick linen layers, wrote the researchers. The amulet, no doubt, was to give him some good luck as he passed into the underworld. But they went even further and went to inspect a mummy they believed was Pentawere. This mummy was known as Unknown Man E. So did he really kill himself? They don't really know, but they did say genetic analysis made them feel pretty sure that they'd got their mummy. It was the son, and all they could say about his death is that his utterly horrific, contorted expression likely means he died horribly. They said he might not have actually killed himself, stating he may have been poisoned or even buried alive. Pentuer didn't get an amulet either. He got a goat skin. In ancient Egypt, this was regarded as a really dirty, impure thing. So in modern times, it was like he got buried with a mangy old sock or a used toothbrush. They likely wanted him to suffer as much as possible during his eternal journey to the underworld. This all sounds a bit grim, but you just have to look at the photo of this mummy going through the CT scan machine. Talk about old world meets the modern world. It's thought that the great leader was around 62 years old when he died, which is quite the run for someone in those days. What's perhaps more amazing is Ramesses II, who reigned for 62 years, lived until the ripe old age of either 91 or 92. October 1996, Princess Diana, fondly known as the Queen of Hearts, sits down at her writing table and nervously turns on the lamp. She picks up her ballpoint pen, takes a deep breath, and starts writing. The words she scribbles in the next few minutes will one day shock the world, for she's about to detail her impending death. 10 months later, what she wrote came true. We'll come back to that.
All your favorite brands are now at Petco. And at great low prices. Petco, the health and wellness company.
That letter soon, but first, for those of you not familiar with Princess Diana, here's an abridged version of her short life. Just enough information to give you an idea of why this woman thought her own family was plotting to kill her and make it all look like an accident. She was born on July 1st, 1961, Diana Frances Spencer. Her family was no ordinary family. They were part of the rarefied upper echelons of Britain's extremely posh elite. When her pop became an earl, she became Lady Diana Spencer. She would later be called the Princess of Hearts and the People's Princess by the fawning media and the dwindling number of people left in the UK who were still proud of their royal family. She grew up among British nobility, playing with boys who were princes and hanging out with girls at finishing schools who all learned to keep a straight back and speak with a queenly allocation. Silver spoons abound. This was no normal British life. Diana was about as familiar with the lives of the British working class as she was with the microorganisms that lived on her $3,000 pillowcase. Still, even with all the obscene luxury and exclusive formalities that she lived with, there was a rebellious streak in her. One day in 1980, she watched a certain young man play polo. This was Prince Charles, not a big fan of the much superior sport of darts. Soon after, they went out on the royal yacht together, and it wasn't long until she met his parents at the royals' home from home, Balmoral Castle. Over a year later, around 750 million people watched on TV what was called a fairy tale wedding. Hundreds of thousands of clamoring Brits hugged the street as the two rode by in a horse-drawn carriage. It might have looked like a fairy tale, but if you've ever read the originals, they're often rather violent and twisted. Notably, during the ceremony, she did not utter the word obey during the vows. To have, to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer, poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, till death do us part. But they decided together to omit the obey part. So it was a match made in heaven. A pretty princess with an adorable smile had met her Prince Charming. But in a few years, she'll describe this heaven as hell. We're not going to get into everything. We have no bedroom secrets for you, but after love-making, missionary style no doubt, 2 children were produced, William and the novelty prince for Americans, Harry. The thing was, Diana wanted to do things her own way. You see, the royals have protocols. You don't just bring up your kids any way you want, but she did. They were her kids, after all. Diana couldn't quite grasp that being a royal meant being imprisoned. She became a bit of a thorn in the royal family's side, but to the public she was an independent woman sticking it to the toffs. Charles then started seeing his ex-lover, Camilla Parker Bowles. It seemed like his blue-blooded younger brother Andrew, Charlie, might have had quite a few affairs behind his pretty wife's back. The relationship was falling apart. The media got hold of information that exposed Charles's affair, while Diana was being applauded for bringing awareness to things such as HIV, animal rights, homelessness, and drug addiction. The rest of the family were left looking like ridiculously privileged artifacts from a time in the past. She was showing them up for what they really were, outdated snobs. Then Diana admitted she felt depressed. She said she felt unstable, and she let it be known that she was the black sheep of the royal family. What you have to understand is that the royals had never talked like this before. What happened in the palace stayed in the palace. Royal propaganda demands that the public see the royals as beacons of infallibility. For millennia, kings and queens around the world have had to look immaculate, almost godly. They are the embodiment of the divine, so the script goes. They aren't supposed to hit the bottle, talk about futility, fart in front of the royal dog, or argue about pubic hairs on the soap. Diana was keeping things a bit too real. This was really, really problematic for the rest of the Unreal family. It's one of the reasons why Harry plays being human these days. Diana's honesty forced an evolution. She went on TV and talked about Charles and his relentless cheating. She talked about how low she felt, admitting that on occasion she purposefully hurt herself. Enough was enough. The Queen then told the pair they had to divorce. This loose-lipped woman had to go before the House of Cards came tumbling down. Diana, now dropping more bombshells than the American military allows, said Charles had impregnated his personal assistant, Tiggy Leg Burke, and she had aborted the baby. Suffice to say, it wasn't anything close to an amicable breakup. Diana's head would have been on the chopping block and her children imprisoned in a dungeon a few centuries earlier. The concern for the family now was, once she's single, what is she gonna say to the press? Let's remind ourselves that the royal family very likely harbors many dark secrets. Prince Andrew or Lord Mountbatten are outstanding examples, but we won't get into that today. That's why when Diana died, many people thought the Queen of Hearts had been taken care of, in the mafia sense of the expression. August 31st, 1997. The British look at the TV and see the headline, Paris car accident, Princess Diana seriously hurt. No one knows exactly how it happened because her car crashed inside the Pont de la Ma tunnel in Paris. Her partner, Dodi Fayed, also died. He was the scion to a family fortune made by his billionaire father, Mohammed Al Fayed. The driver of the car also died. Mohammed Al Fayed always said he thinks his son and Diana were murdered.
The 2023 Kia Sorento. It's the perfect blend of style, comfort, and adventure. You'll be well equipped for any outing with Sorrento's flexible seating and storage options. It's the season of giving back. Grab a fantastic offer and start your family's next adventure in a new Kia.
In a conspiracy cooked up by MI6 and the royal family. If you don't know what MI6 is, think James Bond. It's part of the British Secret Intelligence Service. So, how did the car crash happen? This part is very important, especially when you hear what she wrote in that letter. At 4:30 p.m. that day, Diana and Dodi entered a hotel owned by Dodi's father, the Ritz Paris. Sometime later, Dodi bought a couple of expensive rings from a jewelry store. Around 10 p.m., the two headed off to a swanky restaurant. We should also know that they were hounded all the time by those cockroaches, also known as the paparazzi. Diana ordered the Dover sole, some vegetables tempura, and a mushroom and asparagus omelet. She could have had no idea that this was to be her last meal. The two started eating, but then after thinking some of the other diners were looking at them too much and were actually paparazzi, they took the food to their hotel room. Just before 12:30 a.m., they decided to head off to Dodi's apartment. They got the driver, Henri Paul, and took off in the Mercedes. He'd had a couple of hits of booze himself and was on Prozac, although Prozac isn't really known for making a person high. Still, he was driving a bit recklessly because he was trying to lose the paparazzi. He lost control of the car in the tunnel, hit a pillar, and the two men died instantly. The Queen of Hearts spilled a lot of blood, and while she was cut out of the wreckage, she died soon in the hospital. The medical report would say Diana's body arrived in a condition of serious hemorrhage and shock. An urgent surgery showed a severe wound to the left pulmonary vein. Despite the closure of this wound and the 2-hour external and internal cardiac massage, no official respiratory circulation could be established. There was another guy in the car, though. His name was Trevor Rees-Jones, and he was the couple's bodyguard. His face was pretty much flattened in the accident, and many of his bones broke. Like Humpty Dumpty, he was put back together again, but it took many surgeries. He later said he didn't believe there was any conspiracy to kill Diana, although Dodi's father didn't believe him. After all, the bodyguard had served in the British military before. The father believed this guy was in the employ of the Secret Service. It was a dark day in Britain, even for a country that suffers interminably horrible weather. The country mourned, the paparazzi was despised, and then things began to calm down, and the British again got used to being just mildly depressed all year round. But then the media started bringing the tragic event up again. Turned out that some news media was originally told that Diana had just been a bit bashed up after the crash, but was in no way in mortal danger. In fact, a Sky News anchor later said, "I got a call saying Dodi was dead, Diana was fine, but they thought she'd probably broken her leg." The cops had to investigate this. Remember, what happened in that tunnel stayed in that tunnel. No one has ever seen how Diana died. Even the bodyguard doesn't really know what happened, since after the accident he looked like he'd been sucker punched by a transformer. Dodi's father said Diana was pregnant with his son's baby. He also said the British royals could not accept that an Egyptian Muslim could eventually be the stepfather of the future King of England. Was she pregnant? Medical tests didn't point to that, but if she was that badly bashed up, word on the street is tests wouldn't have been able to detect latent pregnancy. Her body was also embalmed very quickly, which was kind of strange. The hospital said it was hot, and that's why they did it. Did Diana even think that the royals were so demented in their ways that they'd be capable of taking out their perceived enemies Game of Thrones style? The answer is yes, she did. After one of her former bodyguards died in a motorcycle accident, she admitted to having loved the man. She also said it was all found out and he was chucked out of royal protection, then he was killed. I think he was bumped off. British intelligence like the CIA can bump people off, start wars, do all kinds of dark things at their secret black sites. A murder meant to look like an accident could well be in the learning purview of MI6. After all, its members have a license to kill. Nonetheless, MI6 has said in the past that it isn't involved in assassinations, although according to an article in the BBC, operatives have been trained to kill people from time to time. This is from a memo relating to something called Operation Anthropoid. The two agents concerned have been trained in all methods of assassination known to us. They intend to carry out this operation whether or not there is any opportunity of subsequent escape. If the enemy is great enough, there's no doubt Secret Service guys might consider making use of the license to kill. But taking out the Queen of Hearts, that seems outrageous. MI6 shapes the minds of the public. It goes after dictators and terrorists. It even gets down with a bit of torture. But killing a princess? That sounds like something cooked up on Reddit by a poster whose education part of his resume consists of the words Reddit and 4chan. Still, this theory doesn't seem so outlandish when you hear that former MI6 officer Richard Tomlinson believes Diana was taken out by the guys he used to work for. He said that British intelligence was planning to use strobe lights to blind the driver and cause the crash. He said this kind of thing had been taught in training. He became part of an investigation, and that investigation said it could find no evidence that what Tomlinson said was true. But then there was the former butler of Diana, Paul Burrell. It's this guy that she wrote to about her impending death at the hands of the family that had more or less disowned her. The letter starts, "I'm sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me."
YouTube Music is a music app to discover every subgenre that's ever existed. Like some Dominican dembo you didn't know was poppin'. Get YouTube Music Premium.
To keep strong and hold my head high. It also said this, the bit that's caused somewhat of a hurricane. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, or some serious head injury in order to make the path clear for him to marry. Camilla is nothing more than a decoy, so we're being used by the man in every sense of the word. Remember, Tiggy was the assistant to Charles, whom Diana believed had aborted a child. Often, you have to take what you read in the British tabloid media with a pinch of salt, but from what we can see, that letter was genuine. More serious journalists have said as much. However, Burrell had held it back for years and didn't produce it during the inquiry into Diana's death. Here's how she finished the letter. "I have been battered, bruised, and abused mentally by a system for 15 years now, but I feel no resentment. I'm strong inside, and maybe that's a problem for my enemies. Thank you, Charles, for putting me through such hell, and for giving me the opportunity to learn from the cruel things you've done to me." It didn't come as a shock that Dodie's father was somewhat upset by this letter having been hidden for so many years. Diana wrote exactly what he said had happened. Remember, this man was a billionaire too. He likely had some clout himself when it came to investigating the matter. He wrote his own statement soon after he saw the letter. It went, "I'm disappointed that it has taken Burrell 6 years to reveal this extraordinary correspondence, and it raises questions as to what other secrets he may be harboring." In what must now be seen as a cynical attempt to silence him, Paul Burrell was prosecuted in the criminal courts, but this bungled move has simply served to highlight the involvement of the royal household in the strange circumstances surrounding Diana's death. He believed that the investigation itself was a sham, that someone high up had laid a heavy hand on the British police. He was quite aware that the heaviest hands in the entire country were the British royal family and the intelligence services. In a book he wrote, Burrell said Diana talked to him about how she felt hounded by the family and how they were trying to discredit her any way they could. He said one day she invited him around to her place and they spent the day moving furniture and pulling up carpets in an attempt to find MI6 bugs. You have to ask, was Diana suffering from paranoia? She would have been right to worry, seeing as the tabloid media followed her everywhere and her phone had been tapped in the past. This led to something called Squidgygate, but we won't get into that today. All you need to know is she definitely was being spied on. Maybe this and her terrible marriage caused the overwhelming depression. That could certainly result in paranoia, even though it's very possible to assume people were just out to get her. As writer Joseph Heller and later singer Kurt Cobain said, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not after you. What's so darn strange about her letter, though, is that she did die in a car. Maybe the brakes had failed. Maybe the accident was set up. The letter might just also be the rantings of a sick woman who, by an unbelievable coincidence, spelled out how she would die. Even if you're the most reasonable thinker, you can't help but wonder how such a coincidence could happen. We all know that some conspiracy theorists can sit all day in their computers joining vague dots together in self-constructed jigsaw clouds that don't ever reveal a full picture, but who could blame the Diana murder theorists for getting excited when they finally saw that letter? It's just a pity that on the day, the 14 CCTV cameras in that tunnel weren't quite facing in the direction of the crash. Those darn cameras always seem to be faulty or not working when they're needed the most, especially when British royals or their friends are involved. Maybe in the future another piece will be added to the puzzle, but don't hold out hope. There's as much a chance of seeing the Queen unzipping her lizard suit the next time she delivers an annual royal Christmas message.
She was born on July 1st, 1961, with the name Diana Frances Spencer. When her father became an earl, she then became Lady Diana Spencer, and then later some people called her the Princess of Hearts, the People's Princess, and for others, she was England's Rose. As those names suggest, Lady Di was quite the popular princess, and although from nobility, she was liked for being a bit more down-to-earth than some of those posh royals. She had 2 kids, William and Harry, and she was unchangeable when it came to bringing them up on her own terms. The outspoken woman then got divorced, once saying on television about her hubby's transgressions, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." And then she died. Some of you might be old enough to remember the tragic night Lady Di was taken from this world, with a lot of Brits being able to answer this question. Where were you when Princess Diana died? It was some event, a global news story with a massive impact, and tears were shed from Manchester to Mumbai to Manhattan. As we said, Diana upset the apple cart a little during her marriage to Prince Charles, and after she divorced him, she wasn't willing to let herself or her kids be pushed around by the royals. It's said she fell out with Queen Elizabeth before she died, and would have the occasional argument with Prince Philip. It was a right old royal drama, as people might say in London. She was a rebel in some respects, but a rebel with a cause. One of the reasons for her popularity was that people believed that Diana wanted to use her title, her star presence, to do some good in the world. She supported many charities and many causes, including helping raise awareness about HIV.
Voy a llamar. No está tan malo. Tu compañía no me da las velocidades de descarga más constantes.
Spectrum ofrece internet súper rápido y confiable con las velocidades de descarga más constantes. Cámbiate Spectrum a internet de 300 megas por $49.99 al mes.
Animal rights, homelessness, drug addiction, and use of landmines, certain diseases, and more. She wasn't hard on the eyes either, which helped somewhat in her warming to the public. In TV appearances, she spoke openly about her depression, her divorce, which was something the royals just didn't do. Up until then, most of the family agreed that what happens in Buckingham Palace stays in Buckingham Palace. She once said quite candidly on TV, "I didn't like myself. I was ashamed that I couldn't cope with the pressures." Such honesty was unheard of in the royal milieu. And for some, this openness made her legendary. At last, some reality in a royal household. She told the press that some of the royals thought she was unstable, admitting that at times she didn't exactly get along with her extended family. Again, this kind of criticism was unheard of, but it was a breath of fresh air for some Brits. So when she died somewhat mysteriously on the night of August 31st, 1997, there was a lot of talk about her being murdered. Conspiracy theorists believed that she had been shut up for good. But let's start with the accepted story of how she died. Her death was called by some the news story of the century. If the Twin Towers going down was the news story of the following century, Diana's death rocked the world in an equal measure. There's no social network back then, so news didn't travel so fast. We didn't see any last tweet from Diana, such as popped out for a while paparazzi still being a pain. But many Brits will remember something that flashed up on their TVs around 1 in the morning, and that was Paris car accident, Princess Diana seriously hurt. But let's reverse a little. During the day before her death, she had been with her lover Dodi Fayed, the son of Egyptian billionaire Mohammed Al Fayed. Some reports tell us that he even planned to ask her hand in marriage that day, but as they both gave up the ghost that night, we'll never know for sure. Other reports say that it wasn't the case. We know that around 4:30 p.m. that day, they both entered a hotel owned by Fayed's dad, the Ritz Paris. A bit later, Fayed bought a couple of expensive rings from a jewelry store. And quite a lot later, about 10 p.m., the two went to La Espadon restaurant. They had plans to dine somewhere else, but the paparazzi were swarming, so they changed their plans. In the book The Day Diana Died, it's written that she ordered Dover sole, vegetable tempura, and a mushroom and asparagus omelet. This was in fact her last meal. It said Faid started to get suspicious that some of the diners were photographers pretending to be other diners, and so the two took their meal to their hotel room. At midnight, it said that the two wanted to leave the hotel and go to Faid's apartment. And so they got in a black Mercedes S280 with Ritz security worker Henri Paul as the driver. Witnesses say that the driver had drunk a scotch and 1 beer, but later blood tests said that he was 3 times over the legal limit. He liked to drink, his friends later said, but didn't have a problem. He was also on Prozac too. Anyway, he died. Was the crash his fault? Well, that's the billion-dollar question. Some investigators said that it was his fault, 1 for being drunk and 2 for driving recklessly. Anyhow, Paul was driving the pair to Faid's place. At 12:23 a.m., he was driving at high speed because he was trying to lose photographers that were following the car. This didn't end well because Paul lost control of the car in the Pont de la Mar tunnel and hit a concrete pillar. Paul and Faid were said to have died on impact, while Diana received some treatment by someone on the scene, and she was later cut out of the wreckage of her car. There was one survivor, however, and his name was Trevor Rees-Jones. Some reports have said that the reason is that he was wearing a seatbelt, but other reports have said that this wasn't the case. He was lucky perhaps, but not so lucky as his face was completely shattered. It took a long time and many operations to rebuild it. Many years later, he'd write a book, saying he did that because he was bothered about all the conspiracy theories. He once said, "I'm not part of a conspiracy to suppress the truth at all. All I've ever done is give the truth as I see it." Of the night, he said he remembers very little, just that after the crash he heard Diana moaning and called the name Dodie. That's not what Dodie's dad thought though. He believed Rees-Jones was lying and was part of a cover-up. The billionaire said it was murder orchestrated by Prince Philip with spy agency MI6, and this is where the story gets interesting. But first, let's stick to the official tale. At around 1:20 a.m., as an ambulance is taking Diana to the hospital, she suffers cardiac arrest. At 2:01 a.m., she arrives at Pitry-Salpêtrière Hospital and immediately undergoes surgery. At 4 a.m. on the dot, she is pronounced dead. Game over. The English Rose is no more. This is what the doctor told the media. Diana's body arrived in a condition of serious hemorrhage and shock, and urgent surgery showed a severe wound to the left pulmonary vein. Despite the closure of this wound and the 2-hour external and internal cardiac massage, no official respiratory circulation could be established. That same day, her body is flown to England. Even if you weren't a fan of the royals, most people hated the paparazzi. To some extent, those avid loons with cameras are still despised today because of the event. Tears flowed under the grey clouds and drizzle of the UK, while the rest of the world mourned. Well, some cried, but quite a lot of others were already busy constructing conspiracy theories. If you saw the wreckage, you wouldn't have been surprised to hear that people died. The car looked like it had gotten on the wrong side of King Kong. But a strange thing is, some initial reports said Diana had just suffered a concussion, a broken arm, and cuts to one of her thighs. And this is what a Sky News anchor later said. "I got a call saying Dodie was dead. Diana was fine, but they thought she'd probably broken her leg. Maybe this was just a mix-up, but it kinda looks suspicious. Because of all the theories, the English police later started an investigation called Operation Pageant. Millions of dollars later, and they concluded that it was just an unfortunate accident. Many people don't believe this, and let's not forget that there are quite a lot of folks in the world that believe the Queen is a lizard hiding in human skin. Dodie's dad doesn't believe in lizard people, but he had a rational theory that they were purposely killed because Diana was pregnant with Dodie's child. He said the royals could not accept that an Egyptian Muslim could eventually be the stepfather of the future King of England. Tests, though, showed no signs of pregnancy. It just depends if you believe the testers. Other reports say her condition after the crash would have made it impossible to test her for latent pregnancy. Diana herself thought someone was out to get her. Her butler later told the press that she had written that someone is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for Charles to marry. This is true, and she had let it be known that she believed someone was doing things to her cars. One of her bodyguards even died in a bike crash, and Diana said that she thought he had been bumped off. This is not conspiracy, she actually said that. It is very compelling but insubstantial evidence. There's a series of tapes of Diana being very honest about her life. In them she talked about this bodyguard, a man she said she had loved. She also said this: "It was all found out, and he was chucked out of royal protection. Then he was killed. I think he was bumped off." Yep, that's a big deal. There are also theories that the photographers were partly involved, that they actually caused the crash and were working undercover with MI6 or the Wicked Royals. Still, it doesn't hold much water because those guys were all professionals and they were doing what they always did. Was the surviving bodyguard in on it, as Dodie's father said? Well, he was smashed to pieces, so if he was, he really took one for the team. Then some other people, actual witnesses, said they saw bright flashes along the road. Was someone trying to blind the driver as he raced along at high speed? Was this all set up, from someone chasing the car to make it drive fast and then someone else blinding the driver? Police didn't think that was the case. Something else people say is that if Diana had been taken to a hospital sooner, she may well have survived. The thing is, in France, people are often treated on the scene, whereas in the UK or US, there's often a scoop and run policy. The investigators also said that if it was true that medical staff didn't treat her well on purpose, then that conspiracy would have had to involve numerous people, from emergency crews to doctors to many other people. Could that many people all be working for MI6? Doctors also later said that there was no way that anyone could have survived her injuries. She was as good as dead when that car kissed the pillar. Then others say Henri Paul, the driver, was secretly in the service of MI6. An investigation did find that he had a lot of money, too much perhaps for a bodyguard. But again, the British police said they could find no evidence to support the theory that Paul was working with the agency. Maybe one of the best of the theories came from a man called Richard Tomlinson. This former MI6 spy said he thought the agency was involved in her death. He said her death was similar to the way MI6 had planned to knock off former president of Serbia, Slobodan Milosevic. That was to blind the driver using strobes. The police investigated these claims, and while they found that MI6 and MI5 had planned to take out a powerful man in Serbia, it wasn't Milosevic. They also said that they hadn't planned to do it with strobe lights. Tomlinson was later discredited and then arrested by French police and then treated pretty badly by MI6. That's no surprise, because he told a lot of stories about the agency that didn't exactly make them look humane. He's never said he is absolutely sure they killed her, but he did once say, "I would firstly like to state that MI6 do have the capacity to stage accidents, whether by helicopter, aeroplane, or car, and also that the strobe light was shown to us by the SBS at pool." There's also evidence of one SAS soldier admitting they had had a part in the death. It gets worse. It is a fact that there were 14 CCTV cameras in that tunnel, yet none showed the actual crash. It turned out, in short, that none were facing the right way and that others were just not working. That does sound a bit fishy. There are also reports of a white Fiat Uno being involved in the crash, and some believe it was being driven by someone working for MI6. They say it hit Diana's car and there has been a cover-up. Witnesses even say that they saw such a car leaving the tunnel, but no one saw it in the tunnel. This car was never found. Fayed said that a man called Jean-Paul James Anderson owned the car, and he had been watching Diana and Dodie. That much seemed to be true, and indeed he did own a white Fiat Uno. Police said it wasn't the one described though. Fayed said this man was an agent and he was there that night. We might never know the truth, because in 2000 Anderson apparently killed himself. Police said it was definitely a suicide. They found him in his car, his head detached from his body. Anything else? Yeah, lots. She wasn't wearing a seatbelt for some reason when her friend said that it was very much out of character. There's also the fact that she was quickly embalmed. Fayed said that this was because they tried to make further testing, especially for pregnancy, impossible. The medical staff said that it was because her body was deteriorating in the heat, and they had to think quickly. They had to have her looking presentable for the funeral. Will we know more? Well, Fayed tried to fund a movie called Unlawful Killing about that night, but due to the possible legal actions, it never saw the light of day. We'd surely like to see it, but it seems it just disappeared.
November 22nd, 1963. A warm, sunny day in Dallas, Texas. Multiple shots ring out. Moments later, the President of the United States is dead. 2 days later, the man responsible was also dead. The man who killed him, Jack Ruby, descended into an unfathomable mental illness and himself died not too long after. And as you'll see today, many other people connected in some way with the JFK assassination quickly bit the dust. Number 6. So what really happened to Jack Ruby? So what happened to Jack Ruby? How come he lost his mind after he killed Oswald? One man who'd done a lot of research on this topic and a lot of research into the Manson murders isn't quite sure, but does say some things look out of the ordinary. His name is Tom O'Neill, and he just had a book come out after researching the Manson murders for over 20 years. In a podcast, he said this about Ruby's meeting with Louis Jolyon Jolly West, a man that for a long time denied he was working with the CIA on mind control program MK Ultra. O'Neill said, "My most important finding is that a CIA contracted agent or researcher for mind control became that witness's doctor right before he testified and told his story, and then he goes crazy. The problem is no one who worked in MK Ultra will talk about it. It would have remained a complete secret had the CIA got away with destroying all related files. We know that just before Ruby was to testify to the Warren Commission, West visited him in his jail cell. No other people were present. West said Ruby had gone mad and was a paranoid, rambling mess of a man. We must remember here that prior to this, when West wrote to the CIA's mind control master, Sidney Gottlieb, he said his specialty was inducing insanity in people without their awareness. We know that after Ruby shot Oswald, some strange things happened. The police pinned him to the floor, and out of his mouth came these words, "What am I doing here? What are you guys jumping on me for?" It was as if he wasn't in control of himself. A psychiatrist later said that Ruby had suffered from a fugue state with subsequent amnesia. A fugue state is characterized by someone who suddenly loses their sense of themselves, having a kind of breakdown where they don't know what they're doing. Remember, no one had any idea.
What makes arcade tight is they have all these sounds for space. You know, it's just a bunch of cool sounds that you can play in between tight chord. Crazy. On arcade, it finds the key and the tempo. Just brings some swag to it. Yeah. I love how you can just click the right button and it just goes to the next sound. Everything is gonna work, regardless of
what program error is happening?
Yeah, that's it.
Confusing something? That's what. Oh snap! I think that might have been what the issue was. What is going on?
That West had been working with the CIA on mind control. West tried very hard to get involved with Ruby, at one time asking Judge Joe B. Brown to appoint him on the case. According to documents that were found by Tom O'Neill a long time after the trial, West had been asked by someone to work on the case, but he never said who. At first, the judge refused to give West access to Ruby, but with some effort, West insinuated himself in the case. It was thought that perhaps West, with all the skills he had, could help Ruby recall the day he shot Oswald. On April 26, 1964, West boarded a plane and went to see Ruby. Not long after, West came out of Ruby's cell and stated the man had a complete psychotic break. West said that Ruby was positively insane. No one knows and will likely never know what happened in that cell. In a sworn affidavit, West wrote that Ruby was hearing things and seeing things, going as far as to hide under his table because he thought all the Jews in the US would be slaughtered. West said that Ruby said he'd seen his brother tortured, horribly mutilated, castrated, and burned in the street outside the jail. West wrote that Ruby could still hear the screams of Jewish children being boiled alive. It sounded like a really bad trip. After that, any other doctor that met with Ruby came to the same conclusion. He had suddenly gone mad. Still, doctors who talked with Ruby before West had seen him had said he was absolutely fine, not crazy at all. West wrote, "Tonight, my own findings make it clear that there has been an acute change in the patient's condition since these earlier studies were carried out." A doctor that had seen Ruby before and after he had met with West was astounded by the change. His name was Dr. William Beavers, and he wrote that there was a possibility that someone had done something to Ruby, perhaps given him some sort of very powerful drug. He wrote the possibility of toxic psychosis could be entertained, but is considered unlikely because of the protected situation. Obviously, Beavers could not have had an inkling that West was involved in a project that forced powerful drugs on unwitting victims and tried to mess with their minds. A good point is, what if he had known about West's involvement with the CIA's dark program? He probably would have looked into the matter further. What's even stranger is the fact that Ruby was visited by Dr. Werner Tudor in 1965. He made an evaluation and sent the notes to West so they could be submitted to court. West looked at the documents and he erased one part. It said, "There is considerable guilt about the fact he sent guns to Cuba." Why did West expunge that line? Did he have anything to do with Ruby's breakdown? We don't know. There is a possibility that there is more to the story than we already know. After all, the CIA wasn't exactly forthcoming about its mind control efforts. Now, listen to how three men all walked into a room one day and not long after, were all dead. Number 5. Enter at your own risk. The journalist Bill Hunter received some acclaim for writing 3 Days in Dallas after the JFK assassination. He also wrote about Ruby shooting Oswald. He was one of the few people that actually got permission to have a look around Ruby's apartment right after he shot Oswald. In April 1964, Hunter was sitting at a desk in Long Beach Police HQ and he was shot. The gun of a policeman named Crichton Wiggins had apparently accidentally gone off, and a bullet had entered the chest of Hunter, killing him instantly. The officer said he had dropped the gun. Investigators soon found out that there was no way that Wiggins was telling the truth. He admitted that he hadn't dropped the gun at all, but had been playing around with it when it accidentally fired. It's believed Hunter was still working on the case, and that's why his death is seen as suspicious by some of the JFK conspiracy fraternity. Ruby had been living with a man named George Senator. We've seen the court transcripts, so this is very much a fact. Senator said this in a court about Ruby. He was a good, sound American citizen, and politics, he never messed around with that. He never messed around politically at all. The majority was connected with the music industry, the nightlife, his club, his competitors, what they were doing. It was because of Senator that Hunter was allowed into Ruby's room. Also allowed inside was Dallas Times-Herald journalist Jim Cauty and Ruby's attorney Tom Howard. On the 21st of September 1964, while writing a book on the assassination, Cauty mysteriously died. Some sources say that he had been karate chopped to the neck, but other sources say that he was strangled. No one knows what happened, although Time magazine in 1966 attempted to dampen the flames of conspiracy by saying the journalist was well known for hanging out with thugs. Time said police at the time said the motive was somehow connected to homosexuality, but didn't expand on that. We found a news clipping from back then with the headline, "Newsman's Death Termed Murder." The police captain said this in the report. He could have been killed by a karate blow to the neck or have fallen and struck his neck on a table or a bedstand in the room where his body was found. The apartment had been ransacked, and there were signs of a struggle. Police in the end said it was a burglary that had gone wrong, although people have said it had something to do with the notes the journalist had written about the assassination or what he knew about Ruby. 1 year later, Howard also died. His death was ruled a heart attack, although as people are quick to point out, there was never an autopsy. Still, the New York Times wrote that he had died of a massive coronary infection, stating, Mr. Howard had been ill for several days but continued his law practice. He was just 48. As you'll now see, not only men tied to the case died. Number 4. Was this woman really going to crack the case? One journalist actually got to chat with Ruby, and her name was Dorothy Kilgolphin. She was not so sure about the conclusions that the Warren Commission came up with, and she let it be known. She also published some of the commission's findings before they were officially released to the public. What happened to her? On November 8, 1965, she was found dead in her apartment in Manhattan. Prior to that, she had written that the CIA and the Mafia had worked together. Some people have also said that she was a CIA asset. After the assassination, she reportedly told her friends that she was going to crack the case. She said to one person, "In 5 more days, I'm going to bust this case wide open." By all accounts, she had given the first draft of her book to Florence Smith, her friend, and the wife of the ambassador to Cuba. When Kilgolphin's body was found, it was determined that she had died from an overdose of booze and barbiturates. According to some sources, she was found in a room she didn't go in often. She had a book in her lap that she'd already finished, and her reading glasses, which she couldn't read without, were in another room. As for Florence Smith, did she have those notes? No, is the answer. She died 1 day after Kilgolphin of a cerebral hemorrhage. She was 45. No book or notes were found. Still, she had reportedly been ill for some time and had only just gotten out of the hospital. There is evidence that Smith was friends with JFK and Mrs. Kennedy, and it's never been revealed where the New York Times got the information from about her illness and stay in the hospital. That's just what the paper wrote in her obituary. The next one has had conspiracy theorists talking for years, but they might have been seeing things that just weren't there. Number 3, the Benavides brothers. Then there were the brothers, Edward Benavides and Domingo Benavides. Domingo was one of the witnesses who saw police officer J.D. Tippit get shot after the assassination. Some sources say he testified that the shooter looked nothing like Oswald, but from what we can see, he just gave a vague description that could have been a lot of people. Some sources say that a dark presence feared that he would blow the lid on something, so he needed to be taken out. But he wasn't killed. Instead, his brother, who looked like him, was shot in a tavern in Dallas. But, and this is important, the brother was shot after the Warren Commission had people testify in court. Conspiracy theorists have argued that he was shot during the investigation, but we've actually seen his death certificate. Indeed, he was murdered on February 16, 1965. This means he couldn't have been taken out accidentally by someone who wanted to kill his brother. It's just another death that you could say is the type of thing to start making lights go off in someone's head. Now let's look how one official thought that the CIA took out JFK. Number 2, the insiders. Did a man who worked for the CIA have extensive knowledge about the assassination and know that his own team had done the job? The man was named Gary Underhill. According to some books, after the assassination, he said this to a friend: "You're going to Spain? That's the best thing to do. I've got to get out of the country too. This country is too dangerous for me now. I've got to get on a boat too. I'm really afraid for my life. Oswald is a patsy. They've set him up. It's too much. The bleeps have done something outrageous. They've killed the president." The CIA denied that this man worked for them. But then the CIA, it has to be said, has always been very sparing with the truth. It's a fact that Underhill worked in the military intelligence service, so he is a person of interest. It's also stated by credible sources that he did actually say those things after the assassination. Shortly after, he was found dead in his house. According to the District of Columbia Department of Public Health, his certificate of death dated May 8, 1964 read that he shot himself in head with an automatic pistol. Some people have remarked that he had been shot behind the left ear, and the gun was discovered in his left hand. He was right-handed. But then, if he did kill himself, maybe he was an unorthodox kind of guy. Also, would CIA hitmen be that stupid? Now, we turn to the FBI and an agent named Gary Bannister. This guy was a serious anti-communist who later went on to form his own private investigation agency. He was accused by one of his colleagues of knowing about the hit on JFK being an inside job. This guy told a lot of people about that, and he became a big part of the investigation. Bannister died soon after in 1964 from coronary thrombosis. He was 63. Number 1, the lover. According to various mainstream sources, a woman named Mary Pinchot Meyer was a mistress of JFK and a friend of his wife. She was also a good buddy of the wife of a very high-ranking CIA guy. In 1964, she was murdered, and her death to this day remains a mystery. Her affair with the president had been a big secret, and so that information only came out later. As for her death, it was said the shooter must have had extensive training with a firearm. An African-American man named Ray Crump was charged with the murder, but when the case went to trial, he was acquitted. So why would someone have taken this woman out execution style? It's well known that she kept a diary, and in it were things that some people thought the world didn't need to know. After she was killed, people went in search of that diary. One of them was a CIA agent who was caught trying to break into her apartment, according to journalist Ben Bradley. But, so what if the diary exposed the president? So what if he and his mistress smoked weed together in the White House? Did that really qualify for her execution? Well, some of the people believe that this woman knew too much, maybe more than has been let on, and that's why she had to go. It's also worth noting that after the Warren Commission came up with its report, she was very skeptical. Maybe that was one of the reasons why the agency was wiretapping her phone. This is all true, and you have to admit her death and the timing of it do sound quite suspicious.
If you were ever skeptical of John F. Kennedy's assassination being an inside job, this is the story that could change your mind. Welcome to what many believe to be the most convincing of all JFK conspiracy theories. Before we talk about the evidence, and there is tons of it that may surprise even our most skeptical viewers, we need to talk a little bit about the motive. Why would the CIA, perhaps with various other officials of the American government, want to take out their own president? After all, if found guilty, it's a crime that would disgrace America forevermore. The risk involved was monumental, so there had to be a very, very big reason to go through with such a risky and treasonous plan. So we'll start our story in Cuba, Veradero Beach to be exact, about 2 hours from the capital of Havana. The French journalist Jean Daniel is having lunch in the living room of the summer residence of the Cuban leader Fidel Castro, a man the CIA went to almost ridiculous lengths to try to assassinate. At about 1:30 p.m. Cuban time, the phone rings. The news from the other end is that someone had tried to assassinate John F. Kennedy. Castro and Daniel had already talked quite a lot about Kennedy before they received that news. The Cuban leader had pointed out he was reassured by how JFK and the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev had been getting along so well, and that they were possibly working to effectively end the Cold War. At one point, Castro told Daniel, "I know that for Khrushchev, Kennedy is a man you can talk with. I've gotten this impression from all my conversations with Khrushchev." Yeah. Castro told him that he was looking forward to working with Kennedy once the president secured a second term. This was a man the CIA despised. So when news outlets confirmed that Kennedy was dead, Castro, according to Daniel, was very solemn. Castro turned to him and said, "Everything has changed. Everything is going to change." It certainly did. There were to be no more peace talks with the Soviet Union, that's for sure. The Cold War would rage on for many more years. On March 13, 1962, the United States Army General Lyman Lemnitzer, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presented a plan to the Secretary of Defense, a man JFK trusted, Robert McNamara.
Like many of the people working in the highest echelons of the American military and intelligence, Lemnitzer wanted to invade Cuba. Nonetheless, to do that, the U.S. would need a good reason, so Lemnitzer introduced Operation Northwoods to McNamara. This plan pretty much sums up the kind of people that surrounded Kennedy. Operation Northwoods was what was called a false flag operation, a fabricated event in which a fake hostile action requires an offensive response. Lemnitzer wanted to attack the U.S. military bases and blame it on the Cubans. Among the bullets and bombs, U.S. intelligence propagandists would spread rumors on the radio about this vicious attack on innocent Americans. They would hire friendly Cubans to walk around close to the attacks in Cuban military uniforms. They'd then pretend to capture those men. There would be fires set, aircrafts burned, installations bombed, ships attacked, and later even funerals for mock victims. Lemnitzer said they would publish casualty lists in all the biggest newspapers, along with sad stories to get enough popular support to start an invasion of Cuba. In part 4 of the proposal, he wrote, "We could develop a communist Cuba terror campaign in the Miami area, in other Florida cities, and even Washington." He said there would be wounding of innocent people to be widely publicized. They would want to explode a few plastic bombs in carefully chosen spots. U.S. citizens would be outraged, and of course, they'd say, yeah, go kill those commie terrorist bastardos. As crazy as that all sounds, it was par for the course. Such subversion was not unusual during the Cold War. Lemnitzer said all the Joint Chiefs were on board with the plan, and the CIA was firing on all cylinders to make it happen. They believed the evil communists had to be stopped at any cost, which is partly why the CIA committed or encouraged human rights abuses all over the world during the Cold War. This was the political environment JFK entered when he was elected president. To appreciate the JFK assassination conspiracy theory, you have to understand what length certain people in the U.S. military and intelligence would go to. Kennedy dismissed Operation Northwoods, telling Lemnitzer and other key advisors he could not foresee anything in the near future that would justify and make desirable use of the American forces to overt military action in Cuba. This is all well documented, as is everything we'll tell you today. JFK was isolated in his own government, according to the conspiracy theory. He'd already lost support among many of his advisors after the 1961 Bay of Pigs incident, when the CIA secretly sent 1,400 Cuban exiles that they'd trained into Cuba. Kennedy was a much younger president, one with different ideas about how to carry out politics. This plan had been drawn up during the Eisenhower administration before him, and even though JFK would go on to dismiss similar plans during his term, at the end of the day, he was expected to do what he was told. This all started when Castro's forces overthrew the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista in 1959. The CIA now wanted to throw Castro out, just as they'd covertly done with success to leaders in Iran and Guatemala, with plenty of assassinations along the way. To get the job done, Cuban exiles were trained by the U.S. at guerrilla training camps in Guatemala. American involvement was supposed to be kept secret, which did not happen. The whole thing was a total disaster. Castro's troops won and then captured many of the exiles. Kennedy later told friends that the Bay of Pigs was a trap. The older men around him had thought that he'd be drawn into sending troops in. He told his friends Dave Powers and Ken O'Donnell they were sure I'd give in to them. He added they couldn't believe a new president like me wouldn't panic. He said they had me figured out all wrong. JFK did not trust many of the older guys who advised him, and especially the CIA director Allen Dulles. Dulles admitted in memoirs found after his death that the plan was always to get Kennedy to send in troops rather than permit the enterprise to fail. Instead, JFK handed Cuba $53 million worth of baby foods and medicine in exchange for the prisoners Castro had taken. It was a total embarrassment, and while JFK gave the green light on assassination plans for Castro, he still had to keep pushing back the hawks around him that kept telling him to invade Cuba. Then there was Vietnam. The U.S. had been active in Vietnam for years. In 1954, Vice President Richard Nixon said, if the French withdrew, the United States might have to take the risk now by putting our own boys in. The CIA later helped French forces through its Saigon military mission, SMM, directing paramilitary campaigns against the communists and assisting with propaganda. The U.S. even considered using tactical nukes on Vietnam to help the embattled French under Operation Vulture. Much later, in May 1961, JFK agreed to send 500 Special Forces troops and military advisors to help the pro-Western government of South Vietnam. A year later, close to 11,000 American military advisors were working in South Vietnam, and of course, Kennedy approved that. The Americans did not want the communists overrunning Southeast Asia, So, under JFK, U.S. presence
so
did
this
indeed
does look
increase.
decent.
But Kennedy would soon start thinking differently about Vietnam. He was under a lot of pressure to send actual combat troops to Vietnam. As the Pentagon Papers later showed, he was willing to send in advisors and let the CIA do what it needed to do, but he was against sending in units capable of independent combat. The Pentagon Papers, by the way, were thousands of pages of top-secret Department of Defense actions up until 1968 in Indochina. They were released in 1971 and showed the American public a very different side to military America, which would include secret campaigns in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, and result in many, many thousands of dead civilians. The CIA was out of control, which likely wouldn't have happened had JFK not been taken out. That's what the conspiracy theorists think. Daniel Ellsberg, the military analyst and activist behind the Pentagon Papers, had always been unsure about where Kennedy had stood on Vietnam. It didn't seem to make sense to him, sending in more men yet remaining reluctant to send in the combat troops. So he asked JFK's brother Robert Kennedy, RFK, when he got the chance to in 1967. RFK, soon to be assassinated in 1968, too told him that his brother had rejected the urgent advice of every one of his top military and civilian officials, which was to send in troops. Years later, Ellsberg recorded this conversation and said that this is what RFK had said when he was asked why his brother wouldn't send in the combat troops. RFK said, "Because we already were there in 1951. We saw what was happening to the French. We saw it. My brother was determined to never let that happen to us." JFK knew what would happen partly because of the Senate Majority Leader, Mike Mansfield, who he'd sent on a fact-finding mission to South Vietnam in 1962. Mansfield returned and told JFK that getting into a war in Vietnam would be a mistake. JFK later signed a National Security Action Memorandum 217, which forbade high-ranking military and civilian personnel from going to South Vietnam without State Department clearance. This rattled the Pentagon. JFK told Mansfield he was thinking about a full withdrawal from Vietnam, but he would wait. His actual words were, "But I can't do that until 1965 after I'm re-elected. If he tried before, he'd be criticized by the conservatives and might lose some of their vote." JFK told his friend and consultant, a man we mentioned earlier, Kenneth O'Donnell, "In 1965, I'll become one of the most unpopular presidents in history. I'll be damned everywhere as a communist appeaser, but I don't care." McNamara later surprised the military hierarchy in a meeting in Honolulu when he told them 1,000 military personnel were to be withdrawn from South Vietnam by the end of the calendar year 63. McNamara told them to draw up concrete plans. It seems the military had other ideas. After JFK's death, those combat troops were sent en masse. This happened when U.S. officials and subsequently the media said there'd be an unprovoked attack on American vessels in the Gulf of Tonkin. But the facts about this attack were at best manipulated and at worst totally contrived. They served as a pretext to go to war with Vietnam. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution, written by Congress, gave the president virtually unlimited power to do whatever he wanted in Southeast Asia, a power that was very much exercised by both Lyndon B. Johnson and later Richard Nixon. Almost 200 documents that the National Security Agency, or NSA, declassified in 2005 and 2006 show us that Congress was misled. We won't go into all the details today, but what was said and what happened were two very different things. And at the time, the misinformation was enough to make war with Vietnam look justifiable. But JFK's Vietnam withdrawal plan wasn't everything. In July 1993, a Canadian newspaper, through a Freedom of Information request, had 21 secret letters that were written between JFK and Khrushchev declassified. They talked about mountains and lakes and other beautiful things, and they also talked about atomic weapons and the destruction of the world. In one letter, Khrushchev compared their situation to the mythological Noah's Ark, saying they might see each other as clean and unclean, but in the bigger scheme of things, they were on the same ark together and wanted the same thing. They didn't want to blow the whole world up. JFK replied, saying he liked that analogy, adding, "Whatever our differences, our collaboration to keep the peace is as urgent, if not more urgent, than our collaboration to win the last world war." They might have been on friendly terms in those letters, but that didn't stop the Cuban Missile Crisis. After the Americans deployed missiles in Italy and Turkey, the Soviets deployed ballistic missiles in Cuba. This was fighting talk. In fact, what happened next is generally thought to be the closest the world ever came to nuclear war, despite both countries knowing that many, many millions of innocent people would die. In the middle of the crisis, JFK was under pressure to launch an attack. which he knew would mean a full-scale nuclear war. RFK, who was then the U.S. Attorney General, told the Russian ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin, "We are under severe stress. In fact, we are under pressure from our military to use force against Cuba." He then said, "Please pass this message to Khrushchev through unofficial channels." He said, even though the president is against any action against Cuba, an irreversible chain of events could occur against his will. Against his will. This is important to understand. JFK knew when people such as General Curtis LeMay said hit them now and be done with it, they were deadly serious. In that particular instance, JFK replied sarcastically, "And what do you think the reprisal would be?" JFK later told his friend and special assistant, Dave Powers, "Can you imagine LeMay saying something like that? These brass hats have one advantage in their favor. If we listen to them and do what they want us to do, none of us will be alive to tell them they were wrong." JFK and Khrushchev came to an agreement. Khrushchev withdrew those missiles from Cuba. The U.S. did the same in Europe, but that was done in secret, so Mr. Khrushchev lost the vote of confidence in Russia. He was seen as a weak man for trying to save the world from obliteration. JFK later told the historian Arthur Meyer Schlesinger Jr., "The military are mad. They wanted me to do this. They were also mad at him, not just mad in general. They got even madder when he made his commencement address at the American University in Washington on June 10, 1963. He started the speech by telling the students in attendance he wanted to focus on one topic, peace. His words have gone down in U.S. history. To understand why he was taken out, you need to hear some of his speech." Like Eisenhower before him, JFK understood the danger of what had become what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex. "What kind of peace do we seek?" JFK asked. "Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I'm talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on Earth worth living. The kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and to build a better life for their children. Music to the ears of many Americans, but not what the military-industrial complex wanted to hear. He was talking about wasting billions of dollars on nuclear weapons that could destroy the world. He said peace would not be easy, but the U.S. and its enemies should work toward mutual tolerance, and he added that disarmament was favorable to war. He even had the nerve to say, "Let us re-examine our attitudes toward the Soviet Union. A war with this enemy," he said, "would destroy all we have built, all we have worked for." He said he hoped our military forces are committed to peace and disciplined in self-restraint. Our diplomats are instructed to avoid unnecessary irritants and purely rhetorical hostility. He said the words peace and disarmament. The word peace for the Pentagon is like garlic for a vampire. Did JFK really mean it though? Was he serious about disarmament and ending the Cold War? Documents on this matter and his actions say yes, he was serious, according to the conspiracy theorists. With all of these talks of peace and disarmament, JFK had basically put a target on his head. Then on July 25, 1963, JFK delivered a 26-minute televised address on the nuclear test ban agreement. He and Khrushchev had agreed not to test new nuclear weapons. Kennedy told Americans in their living rooms that since the nuclear weapons had been created, all mankind has been struggling to escape from the darkening prospect of mass destruction on Earth. This was not disarmament, but he did say a journey of 1,000 miles must begin with a single step. On October 11th that year, he signed the initial order to withdraw 1,000 troops from Vietnam. That target on his head got much bigger. In Action Memorandum 263, he said that the major part of the U.S. military task in Vietnam can be completed by the end of 1965. This memorandum later came out in the Pentagon Papers. Even so, when JFK signed that order, the CIA was doing things in Vietnam that he had no control over. The reporter and editor for the Washington Daily News, Richard Starnes, wrote that the CIA had penetrated every branch of the American government in Saigon. They ran the show. There was what Kennedy wanted in Southeast Asia, and there was what the CIA wanted. They were out of control, and always had been, which is why Kennedy said he would splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it into the winds. He said this about an agency that hired mafia assassins to take out politicians and had an assassination manual that talked about throwing people from buildings to make their deaths look like an accident. The manual explained in some cases, a CIA assassination must be made to look like it was committed by a fanatic of some sort. It added politics, religion, and revenge are about the only feasible motives, although it is intended that the assassin die in the act. You'll hear more about this kind of fantastic assassin later, but first, let's finish this first part of the show. Our mode of explanation with National Security Memorandum 239, which was titled U.S. Disarmament Proposals and was signed by John F. Kennedy. It said, I have in no way changed my views of the desirability of a test ban treaty or the value of our proposals on general and complete disarmament. Further, the events of the last 2 years have increased my concern for the consequences of an unchecked continuation of the arms race between ourselves and the Soviet bloc. He wanted again to talk about general and complete disarmament of nuclear weapons, and he said he would be the one to lead the talks and make this happen. He was effectively talking about ending the arms race and possibly the Cold War. He meant what he had told those students about peace and stopping humanity's slow crawl to total annihilation. Ending the Cold War, say the conspiracy theorists, was about as much as JFK's official foes could take. The target on his head was shining like the North Star on a clear night. Kennedy now only had a few months of his life left to live. Now, you have a motive, but as yet, no evidence. On October 31st, 1957, a man named Lee Harvey Oswald arrived at the American Embassy in Moscow and met the consul, Richard Snyder. Oswald, who 2 months before had been discharged from the U.S. Marine Corps, told Snyder he wanted to renounce his U.S. citizenship. He then handed Snyder a letter
Yo, what's
that
up,
explained,
Danny? Yeah,
"My
I'm
allegiance
here.
is
I
to
just
the
got it on
Union
mute
of
because I'm on the
Soviet
phone.
Socialist
But I'm here.
Republics."
I can see
In
your
an
chat and
era of
everything.
rabid
It
anti-communism
is
in
the same
US,
shoot.
This
This
was
shoot was
incredibly
like
risky,
old from like last year
especially
that I'm
if
working on.
Oswald
I
ever
haven't
returned
submitted
to
to
the
some
U.S.
magazines, but
Soviet officials who were present were led to believe that Oswald might know something of special interest. Oswald said he would make known to them all the information concerning the Marine Corps and his specialty therein. All of this is documented. But what did he know? Wasn't he just a regular soldier, as people were later told? It's often said that Oswald was a kind of nobody in the military, but his job as a radar operator at Atsugi Air Force Base in Japan was not a nobody's job. This is a crucial base of operations for the CIA as it acted as its headquarters in that part of the world. With one more base in the region, this was where the CIA's very secretive U-2 spy planes took off from. This program was run by CIA officer Richard Bissell, who worked closely with CIA Director Allen Dulles, both of whom were tasked with using these planes for spying missions over the Soviet Union. Rather than a nobody, Oswald had crypto clearance at the radar control room where he worked, meaning the most top secret of top secret clearance. Oswald often listened to the radio communications of the U-2. He certainly would have known many things the Soviet Union would have wanted to know. Marine Corps Lieutenant John E. Donovan was later Oswald's officer at another base where Oswald had the same access to ultra top secret information. But what's incredibly strange is that when the Warren Commission later interviewed Donovan about Oswald's involvement in JFK's death, they asked not one thing about Oswald's U-2 work and his access to top secret information. You'd think that that would have been important, say the conspiracy theorists. When Donovan was asked about that years later by a writer, he told the writer that he actually asked the Warren Commission investigators, "Don't you want to know anything about the U-2? They replied, "We asked you exactly what we wanted to know from you, and we asked you everything we wanted for now, and that's all." Donovan then asked another guy from the program if they had asked him about Oswald's U-2 work, and he confirmed that he wasn't asked about it either. Weird. It's also weird that 6 months after Oswald defected, the first U-2 plane was shot down by the Soviets. It was as if they had insider information. But guess what? When a year later Oswald returned to the US after some factory work in Minsk, the Americans, who had been made aware of Oswald's possible connection to the U-2 attack, allowed him to walk right back into the country without a problem. They gave him a passport and even a loan just 24 hours after he applied for the passport. This was insane considering that Oswald had worked on classified spying technology and defected to the enemy shortly after. Many would see this as treason. Something fishy was going on. People who later wrote about this said every single obstacle was removed for Oswald on his return to the US. The Warren Commission never uttered a word about Oswald's crypto clearance and his U-2 work. But why? Something else the Warren Commission didn't talk about was the fact that Oswald worked near the CIA site in Japan, where MK-Ultra mind control experiments were conducted on captives and its own soldiers. A CIA member.
If you're creating content that stands out, you are not looking for just music. You are looking for great music.
Real music from real artists. That's audio.
Audio hurt us, y'all, and they made a plan specifically for creators like you and like me.
Many creators were requesting a monthly plan. Audio Listen.
Wait a minute. Audio is now $15 a month?
Audio.com just launched exactly what we've been asking for. Now for just $14.99 a month, we get unlimited access to music and sound effects for all our personal social channels. Yep, even monetizing on YouTube.
So you can level up what you're currently doing, or you can start that YouTube channel that you've always wanted to start.
Memo declassified just recently, titled Truth, Drugs, and Interrogation, tells us that the CIA dosed agents who performed dangerous overseas missions. Maybe the Warren Commission didn't know about the mind control stuff, but that would be surprising since the commission used CIA and FBI personnel for the investigations. Yes, some say the CIA was tasked with investigating a crime it had committed. Former CIA agent Victor Marchetti, who wrote the book saying many things the CIA did not want to be published, said back then the CIA ran an operation from the Office of Naval Intelligence in which young men were to appear like they were angry at the US and disenchanted with its capitalist ways. They were then sent to the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe as spies. About 40 men were in the program, each of them trained at Nags Head, North Carolina. They learned how to act and what to say, with the Americans knowing the KGB would pick these men up at some point. The Americans hoped the KGB would try to turn them into spies, making them valuable double agents. Is that what Oswald was doing when he went to the Soviet Union? Very possibly, say the conspiracy theorists. Oswald's former roommate in the US, James Botello, said Oswald's whole pro-communist thing was a total lie, a pretense. He told writers that Oswald was actually anti-communist. He added, "I was sure that Oswald was on an intelligence operation in Russia." He said when Oswald returned and was welcomed back with open arms, not even being questioned by US police or intelligence, he knew Oswald was definitely working for intelligence. Moreover, considering Oswald defected to the USSR and told the guys at the embassy on record that he had information to give the Soviets, how come he could move around without constantly being surveilled? How did he manage to kill JFK with that kind of history, with the CIA knowing he was working where JFK would one day pass? The conspiracy theorists say this guy makes about as much sense as the movie Inception. Well, I mean, they didn't exactly say that, but you get the point. It's believed a man named George de Mohrenschlitt was Oswald's CIA handler. In 1977, he gave an interview saying this was true. He explained that a CIA agent named J. Walton Moore put him in touch with Oswald. Mohrenschlitt said, "I would never have contacted Oswald in a million years if Moore hadn't sanctioned it." The New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison, depicted in the movie JFK by Kevin Costner, called Mohrenschlitt a CIA babysitter. Garrison said some of Mohrenschlitt's family told him Oswald had been made a scapegoat for JFK's assassination. Mohrenschlitt's wife and daughter said on record that he was the one who got Oswald a job in Dallas at a graphics arts company. This firm, Jaggers, Childs & Stovall, was, according to the Warren Commission, just a regular commercial advertising outfit, and left out the fact that the company made highly classified maps for the US Army, possibly maps of Cuba and the Soviet Union, which Oswald could have helped with. 3 hours after Mohrenschlitt opened his mouth about his relationship with Oswald, he was found dead in a house in Florida. This happened just minutes after Gaten Fonzie, an investigator with the House Select Committee on Assassinations, had come knocking at his door and left a card. The writer James Douglas, whose investigations we've used a lot today for this show, believes Mohrenschlitt was just a pawn in the game. Garrison understood only too well that people who talked tended to suddenly die, which is why he hid one female witness we'll discuss later. We'll also show you a bunch of very mysterious deaths. The man running the CIA's counterintelligence programs from 1954 to 1967 was James Jesus Angleton. This Yale graduate was a fervent anti-communist and was the head of the CIA's assassination program, which he ran with Army Colonel Boris Pash. The latter is more famous for investigating Robert Oppenheimer for alleged spying activities for the Soviets regarding the atomic bomb. Pash also led the Alsace mission when the Americans tried to grab Nazi scientists who'd worked on the atomic bomb and chemical weapons. After that, he took charge of the CIA's so-called wet.
Dale un giro a tu mundo, cambiándote a Spectrum OneStream.
Y ahora cuando agregas Spectrum y Plan Latino TV, recibes el nuevo Sumo Streambox gratis con todo tu entretenimiento en un solo lugar.
Y con el control remoto de voz por TV en vivo buscamos y por...
Las streaming apps que miramos.
Disfruta streaming simplificado.
Affairs, which were assassination and kidnapping programs. When the Church Committee and the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, looked into such men, they found that Angleton's Special Investigations Group had a file on Lee Harvey Oswald. It was called a 201 file. The CIA had this on Oswald for 3 years before JFK was killed. The Warren Commission had not found this, and if it had, things might have turned out very differently. 201 files were for CIA operatives that needed to be watched closely as they become suspicious. But what's also interesting here is that documents were unearthed that showed the CIA had been creating phony 201 files for the ZR Rifle project, which was related to the assassination of political leaders. The reason that some of these files were forged was so the CIA could one day use that person as a scapegoat. They could say, look, we already knew this agent was up to no good, and then place all the blame on him. The HSCA interviewed a woman named Ann Egerter. She worked for Angleton and had seen Oswald's 201 file. It was her testimony that showed us that Oswald was actually a CIA asset, but one who was under investigation by the CIA, or perhaps being set up to become a scapegoat. We should say that she was indirect with her answers when interviewed, but researchers now say her testimony implies strongly that either Oswald was indeed a member of the CIA or was being used in an operation involving members of the CIA. The former CIA finance officer Jim Wilcott also backed up the fact that Oswald was a CIA asset. Wilcott became a whistleblower who said he left the CIA when he realized the work they were doing had nothing even remotely to do with humanism. His wife, who was also CIA, left too. They both testified that by leaving, they'd be able to sleep better at night. Jim testified that another reason was that while working at the Tokyo station, other loose-lipped CIA agents told him the CIA killed JFK. Jim testified, I thought these guys were nuts, but then a man I knew and had worked with before showed up to take a disbursement and told me Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA employee. I didn't believe him until he told me the cryptonym under which Oswald had drawn funds. Jim then realized that he himself had advanced funds to this same cryptonym, which in his eyes made him partly involved in his beloved president's assassination. In 1978, after Jim had left what he saw as a disgraceful agency, he told the San Francisco Chronicle it was common knowledge in the Tokyo CIA station that Oswald worked for the agency. It was also widely known that he'd been employed to become a double agent spying on Russia. Jim explained Oswald was recruited from the military for the express purpose of becoming a double agent assigned to the USSR. More than once, I was told something like, so-and-so is working on the Oswald project back in the late 50s. He added, one of the reasons given for the necessity to do away with Oswald was the difficulty they had with him when he returned. Apparently, he knew the Russians were onto him from the start, and this made him very angry. After this kind of talk, both Walcotts had their lives made very difficult, which, as you'll soon see, happened to many people. They were followed everywhere they went. They struggled to find work. Their car tires were slashed. They regularly received threatening phone calls. Now we should talk about Richard Case Nagel, a CIA double agent who was arrested on September 20th, 1963, after walking into the State National Bank in El Paso, Texas, and firing 2 shots into the ceiling. He said he'd purposely got himself arrested because I would rather be arrested than commit murder and treason. Nagel had worked for Field Operations Intelligence, which was tasked with covering up the true nature of the CIA objectives. As a double agent, he also worked for the KGB, and one of his tasks was surveilling Lee Harvey Oswald. Nagel admitted all of this later at a time when fewer people believed Oswald had acted alone in killing JFK, or even acted at all. Nagel also said the KGB knew about the JFK assassination plot before it happened. He said if anyone wanted to stop the assassination, it was the better leader for the Soviets than anyone who might replace him. The KGB told Nagel to either kill Oswald or to at least try to convince him that he was being set up to become a patsy. He told him when he met Oswald in New Orleans. Nagel also sent FBI boss J. Edgar Hoover a registered letter saying he'd been ordered to kill Oswald and that there was a plan to assassinate JFK. Nagel believed that he would somehow be implicated in this assassination, so he got himself arrested. Jim Garrison interviewed him and later said he was the most important witness there was. Nagel said after talking to Garrison, he survived 3 attempts on his life and then agreed to stay quiet for a nice pension. But what about his letter to Hoover? He said he wrote it in a way to persuade the reader that its sender was familiar with CIA procedure, that it was not a crank letter. He used the alias Joseph Kramer, a pseudonym of a Soviet agent known.
Hey guys, real quick, let me give you a tip on Udemy. It's a big online learning platform with video courses in thousands of topics from IT to development to marketing to how to make video games. And it's not just videos. A lot of their courses offer practice exercises and quizzes and Q&A, so you're not just watching, you're really learning. You know, Udemy does offer a satisfaction guarantee on all of their courses, but trust me, you're not even gonna need it because they have fantastic instructors with real-world experience. And what they teach you can help you accomplish your goals, whether it's a new job or a promotion or even just a new hobby. Learning can literally change your life, so do not miss out. Find the perfect course for you.
I gotta get Daniel over here to help me with my stream.
Why wait to get paid? With PayPal invoicing, 79% of invoices are paid within 1 day. Easily create and send professional invoices that let your customers choose how to pay. Send your first invoice today.
Known to the US. Surely that would mean the FBI knew what was going to happen to JFK. The FBI has always denied it received such a letter. Since there is no letter, Nagel has been painted as a loon. But then, in 1995, the Assassination Records Review Board, ARRB, got in touch with Nagel, saying they would take him seriously as long as he told them everything and handed over every document he had that could show he was telling the truth. They mailed him a letter saying that on November 1st, 1995, which was the day he was found dead in his bathroom in his house in LA. It was said to be a heart attack, in spite of him being in good health and having no heart issues. We should add that under MKUltra, the CIA worked on methods to cause people to have heart attacks. His son Richard was left the key to a storage lockup in Tucson, Arizona, where his dad had told him he kept all of his documents in a purple trunk consisting of everything about his time in the CIA. When Richard arrived, he found all of his father's things, minus the purple trunk. It was gone. It was also strange that the day Richard went to Arizona, his house was broken into and ransacked. Weird. We should also mention Thomas Arthur Valley, the man believed to have been the CIA's first patsy, who was to be blamed for the assassination of JFK on November 2nd in Chicago rather than November 22nd in Dallas. This was only made public knowledge 4 decades after JFK was assassinated. Information about Valley, the fact that he looked like Oswald and had a background similar to Oswald's, was never made available to federal agents in Dallas at the time of JFK's visit. The assassination in Chicago failed, but Valley was still arrested. The file on Valley said he was a far-right-wing lunatic obsessed with guns, a loner, and paranoid. This fits perfectly with what the CIA like to call lone actors when they need to blame a crime on someone. The Secret Service had learned about the Chicago assassination plot, so raced to Valley's house where they found an M1 rifle and 500 rounds of ammunition. They told the Chicago police to watch this man 24 hours a day. A day later, policemen Daniel Groth and Peter Sherla pulled over Valley's car and found a hunting knife in the back. In the trunk were 300 rounds of ammunition. When investigators later interviewed Valley, he told them he'd worked in Japan on the secret U-2 program. They found his car's license plate had been frozen. Journalists were told the plate information was classified. As for those 2 detectives, they went on to have astonishing careers in police intelligence. The academic Daniel Stern investigated Groth's police career and said he'd never had anything close to a normal career. He went missing for long periods. He and other researchers said Groth actually worked for counterintelligence. Had they been part of a plot to make Valley a patsy, placed there just in case the assassination was successful? Valley's sister, Mary, believes her brother was set up as a potential assassin. She said Thomas was never the lone nut he'd been portrayed as, although he did have a history of some mental health issues. That's why he was honorably discharged from the Marines in September 1956. What's more, Valley later told the journalist Edwin Black that he'd worked for the CIA at a training camp in Long Island, training Cuban exiles in the art of assassination. Just like Oswald, he'd somehow managed to find a job right where the Chicago assassination attempt would happen, where JFK's motorcade would pass. It was as if his life was the double of Oswald's. Later investigation showed Valley also had access to a window at his new workplace that had the perfect view of the motorcade that was to pass through Chicago. Secret Service heard that 2 snipers with high-powered rifles were believed to be waiting for the president to pass through. The Secret Service, now knowing about the threat, arrested 3 men as possible snipers, and another 2 men were being held. These men were in custody just as the Chicago cops arrested Valley. The possible snipers arrested that day also didn't become known to the public for decades. Abraham Bolden, the first black person to ever guard a president, was there in Chicago. He later said he couldn't understand why some of JFK's security was so lax. He said some of the men were drunk half the time. Bolden started drawing lines between what happened in Chicago and what happened in Dallas. On May 17, 1964, he tried to call the Warren Commission about this, but he didn't get through. On May 18th, he was arrested and accused of trying to sell Secret Service files. He was disgraced, even though there was hardly any proof. At his home in Chicago, as he sat in prison, his garage was burned down. A shot was fired through a window, scaring his wife and kids. When he spoke with Jim Garrison, he was subsequently put in solitary confinement. In 1995, when AARB got on the case, the Secret Service destroyed all records of the Chicago plot after AARB investigators asked for access to them. So, the theory goes that Oswald was framed, but to frame him, he needed to be seen doing a lot of sketchy things prior to the investigation. More than just going to Russia or seeming like he was pro-Cuba. That's where his double comes in. Prior to the assassination, there were many sightings of a man who looked like Oswald. He was seen at a firing range on a few occasions. The theory says that the CIA was trying to make this man look guilty by sending a body double to the local firing range. One of the witnesses in the Warren Commission, Malcolm Price, said someone who looked like Oswald asked for help with his scope at a Dallas firing range. The witness, Garland Slack, said he was at another firing range, and this Oswald character drew attention to himself by burning up his ammunition on Slack's own target. Slack said when he complained, the man gave him a look he would never forget. The problem was, when the Warren Commission was told about these events, Oswald was supposed to be in Mexico City, visiting the Russian and Cuban embassies. There were too many Oswalds. The conspiracy theorists say they weren't just setting up Oswald, but indicting the whole of the Soviet Union in a Cold War they needed the American public to support. 4 days before JFK was shot and killed, the Soviet embassy in Washington received a letter written by Oswald, or at least signed by Oswald. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI read the letter before it ever got there. In the letter, Oswald admitted to meeting with Valery Kostikov, the KGB's undercover assassination specialist. So the man who apparently killed the JFK 4 days prior to killing him sent a letter talking about hanging out with the Soviet assassin. This was a perfect setup. But how do we know Oswald wrote the letter? Asked the conspiracy theorists. The Russian ambassador wrote, "This letter was clearly a provocation. It gives the impression we had close ties to Oswald." He said the U.S. must have been aware of the letter. He added that whoever wrote it was no doubt behind the assassination. When Lyndon Johnson became president after JFK, he actually decided not to scapegoat the Soviet Union, but he didn't question the fact that Oswald was guilty. The Warren Commission would later make out that Oswald's plan was to escape by plane to Cuba after he knocked off the president. This obviously didn't happen since Oswald was arrested and later shot dead by someone we'll discuss later, Jack Ruby. Maybe not a man who you think he was. Oswald didn't fly away, but it had to look like he had planned to do it. The patsy needed a fake getaway. On November 20th, 1963, a car drove into Red Bird Airfield just outside Dallas. It parked close to the American Aviation Company, a private airline. One man stayed in the car and a woman and a guy entered the office. They said they wanted a Cessna 310 for November 22nd and wanted to fly to the Yucatan in Mexico, not too far from Cuba. Wayne January, who was the owner, became suspicious when he asked lots of strange questions such as how far the plane would go, at what speed, and where else they could fly besides Mexico. These were amateur-sounding questions, the type a kid or criminal would ask. January also said he looked in the car at the guy that didn't come in, and not surprisingly, he said it was Lee Harvey Oswald. He said that after the assassination, of course, Red Bird Airfield was just 5 miles from where Oswald lived. In 1991, through a Freedom of Information request, a British man named Matthew Smith got hold of the FBI's report on the Red Bird Airfield incident. Smith then flew into the U.S. to find Wayne January and told him what the FBI had said about the incident. January was shocked. The FBI had written that the incident occurred in July, not November, 2 days before the assassination. It also said January had been unsure about it being Oswald in the car when he had told him it was for sure him. His exact words were, "I gave them a 9 out of 10 chance." The reason for all the lies, say the conspiracy theorists, is that in January's testimony, he said he thought those two people were thinking about hijacking a plane to Cuba. After President Johnson decided not to implicate Cuba or the Soviet Union in JFK's death, they now didn't need this Red Bird Airfield incident. It had to be played down. Just half a day after the Red Bird incident, a police lieutenant in Louisiana named Francis Frug was called into a hospital in Eunice, Louisiana. There he met a woman who was in withdrawal from opiates. Her name was Rose Charmaine. She said she'd been driving with two men, who later threw her out of the Silver Slipper bar that they were drinking at, and she got run over. Frug took her to another hospital where she could have her withdrawal in more comfort. And on the 2-hour journey, Charmaine told him the two guys she'd been driving with had told her they were going to kill the president when he arrived in Dallas. She said they were either Cubans or Italians. He didn't, of course, think so much of it since she was in a bit of a state at the time. But when 2 days later JFK was shot, Frug called the hospital and told him not to let Charmaine out of there. He couldn't believe it. Had she really known? After JFK was killed, they contacted the FBI about what she had told them, and they were told they already had their man. They didn't want to know about Charmaine's story. In a strange twist of fate, it also came to light that Charmaine had once worked for the nightclub owner, Jack Ruby. She also told Frug that through Ruby, she had met Lee Harvey Oswald. She explained that Ruby and Oswald were actually quite close. She never got to testify in the subsequent JFK investigations. On September 4th, 1965, she was found dead in the middle of a road in Big Sandy, Texas. The driver of the car that had hit her said that he had swerved to miss some suitcases piled in the road. Only when he swerved, he went over a body. It's never been explained why a woman at 3 in the morning was lying in the road next to a pile of suitcases. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, who later wrote the book about JFK's assassination, said her autopsy showed the kind of head wound that's usually associated with a gunshot wound. She might not have even been hit by the car. Jim Garrison wanted to exhume her body, but the state of Texas refused his request. When Mac Manuel, the owner of the Silver Slipper, was later interviewed, he identified the two men that she was with as Sergio Smith and Emilio Santana, two Cuban exiles. Santana told Jim Garrison that he had worked for the CIA in 1962 when he first got to Miami. He was involved in moving weapons on the sea for guerrilla fighters in Cuba. The CIA admitted to using him, but said they terminated his contract in 1963. Charmaine's story might sound unbelievable, but it's just a little bit strange that she talked about knowing JFK was going to be killed at a time that she was seen with Cuban CIA operatives. The conspiracy theorists say this is just one coincidence of hundreds of strange coincidences. As for the other man, Smith, he'd once been arrested in Venezuela on charges of plotting to kill President Ernesto Betancourt, the so-called father of Venezuelan democracy. Records show Smith was released from prison and the U.S. Embassy came to his aid. He went straight to New Orleans, where he worked with a Cuban exile group, and it was there he befriended the detective/intelligence agent Guy Bannister, who also knew Oswald. Small world, eh? Say the conspiracy theorists. Bannister and Smith had offices in the same building, the Bolter Building. The witness, David Lewis, who worked for Bannister, later testified that Oswald and Smith knew each other. Okay, let's move on a little bit. 23-year-old Julia Ann Mercer said on the day JFK was murdered, she saw a green truck parked close to Dealey Plaza, where the president would be killed in 1.5 hours. A man exited the truck and pulled out what she described as a rifle case. The man then walked over to an area that would later become known as the Grassy Knoll. She said 3 cops were standing nearby and not one of them did anything about this man walking around with a rifle case. She then pulled up next to the truck and looked at the driver. She got a clear look at him, but only recognized him 2 days later when she saw his face on TV. She was absolutely sure the guy driving the truck was Jack Ruby. She said that well before anyone ever asked her questions about some conspiracy. After seeing the guy with the rifle, she'd been overheard telling her friends about it at a restaurant. Police officers later stopped her and told her she'd been heard chatting about seeing a man with a rifle. And what's more, the president had just been shot. She was then questioned for 4 hours at a Dallas police station. When Jim Garrison interviewed her later, he showed her and her husband the statements she had made to the cops. She looked at them, and she said she'd never said anything like that. Her actual words to Garrison were, "They've all been altered. They have me saying just the opposite of what I really told them." She said she'd been given photos to look at by the cops of who might have been driving the green truck. She picked up one of them and said it was him for sure. She turned it over and on it was written Jack Ruby. "They definitely showed me Jack Ruby and I definitely picked him out as looking like the driver," she told Garrison. Just imagine if this had gotten out before Ruby killed Oswald. It would have been massive, but the cops wrote that Mercer had been unable to identify the truck driver. She told Garrison that she told her family the day she saw Ruby on TV that this was the guy she'd seen driving the truck. She then notified the FBI that not only had she seen Ruby in the photo, but that she had seen him again on the TV. But this wasn't in any FBI report. The only thing the official report said that was indeed one of the photos she'd been shown was of Ruby, but they said she hadn't picked him out. Garrison told her the FBI report said she said the words air conditioning were written on the truck, but she told Garrison that she told the FBI the truck had no writing on it. I clearly said there was no printing on the truck, she told Garrison, but that didn't stop the agents from spending 2 days looking for air conditioning trucks. She also told Garrison neither of the signatures on these 2 pages of the affidavit are mine, although they are close imitations. On the day of the assassination, Sheriff Bill Decker and Police Chief Jesse Curry were both nervous. They knew the president would be exposed. Both of them had been told by the Secret Service to lighten security that day. Decker had told his men they were to take no part in the security of the presidential motorcade. The House Select Committee on Assassinations later said both these men were just following orders from the Secret Service, orders that proved to be fatal to the president. The Secret Service said that JFK was the one who didn't want officers all around him, but subsequent interviews refute this. Air Force Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who'd protected President Eisenhower before, said all the windows of buildings in the vicinity should have really been locked down with tape over the order "Do Not Open," but that never happened. There was a vacuum of security for JFK. Deputy Sheriff Roger Craig said just after the president was shot, he saw a man running down the hill toward another man driving a light green Rambler station wagon. He tried to stop them, but he couldn't get across the street and the car took off. Craig then ran toward the Texas School Book Depository to tell the Secret Service. There he met a man who said he was Secret Service, who Craig said didn't seem very interested in what he had to say. Craig later went to the police station and talked to Captain Will Fritz of the Homicide Division. By this time, Fritz said they had a man in connection with the killing. Craig asked to look at him to see if he was the same man he'd seen running toward that green Rambler. It was the same man, but how could it be? Oswald said that station wagon belongs to Mrs. Payne. Don't try to drag her into this. Mrs. Payne, who Oswald and his wife had stayed with, owned a station wagon, but it was a Bel Air Chevrolet. This would all be refuted anyway when the Warren Commission would say Oswald walked out of the building and got on a bus. The witness, Helen Forrest, also said she saw the running man enter a green Rambler. James Pennington corroborated what she saw, while some witnesses said they saw a man in a hat and tan or brown sports coat. Carolyn Walter said she saw a man in the school book depository leaning out of a window holding a rifle. Marvin Robinson and Roy Cooper both saw a man running down the hill toward the green Rambler. The Warren Commission rejected all these reports of a green Rambler. They couldn't use them because when Oswald was seen getting into the Rambler, Officer Marion Baker and Roy Truly said they'd seen Oswald on the second floor of the Texas Book Depository. What about JFK's injuries? His wife Jackie said, "I was trying to hold his hair on, but from the front there was nothing. But from the back, you could see, you were trying to hold his hair on and his skull on." The Warren Commission wiped these words from their investigation, saying they were in poor taste. What these words might also have done is help prove that her husband was shot from the front. We won't get into the magic bullet theory too much because it would make our story even longer, but just keep in mind that this very crucial fact was striked from the official report. On the day of the shooting, William Allen Harper was taking photos near the grassy knoll. He actually found a large piece of skull fragment, which he then took to his uncle, Dr. Jack Harper. Jack passed it on to Dr. Cairns, the chief pathologist at the hospital where they worked. Both Cairns and another pathologist looked at the fragment and said it was a piece of skull belonging to the occiput, the lower back of the human skull. 9 years later, a student at UCLA realized that the x-rays of JFK's skull couldn't have been the real thing if these pathologists had been right. The x-rays showed a different part of his skull was missing. The x-rays fit the official story, which said there was only one gunman. But the skull fragment those guys had looked at suggested there must have been more than one perpetrator, meaning JFK was also hit from the front. Dr. David Mantic, a radiation oncologist, later investigated the x-rays and determined they were not authentic. They'd been forged, he said. As for Oswald, he told the cops that when the president was shot, he was having lunch on the first floor. He then went up a floor to buy a Coke from the vending machine. A key witness whose testimony was ignored by the Warren Commission saw Oswald there at 12:15. Her name was Carolyn Arnold. She said she knew Oswald well because he was always stopping by her desk and asking for change for the vending machine. She said she knew the time when she saw Oswald as it was lunchtime. She went into the canteen for some water and saw Oswald sitting there with his Coke. She said he was alone as usual and appeared to be having lunch. This was apparently 15 minutes before he must have raced up 3 flights of stairs, set his sights on the president, shot him, and then escaped. JFK was also supposed to pass there at 12:25, so the killer was apparently sitting back and acting relaxed 10 minutes before getting ready for the shooting in a different part of the building. About 1.5 minutes after the shooting, Dallas patrolman M.L. Baker flew into that second-floor canteen, where he saw a calm Oswald. Baker then asked the superintendent, "Do you know this man?" Superintendent said yes. Oswald then finished trying to get a Coke from the machine. 1 minute later, the clerical supervisor, Mrs. R.A. Reed, also saw Oswald on the second floor. He had a can of Coke in his hands. They all testified that when they'd seen Oswald, he was not out of breath and looked totally calm, and yet the Warren Commission was trying to say he pulled off the crime of the century and moved about as fast as Casper the Ghost. 15 years later, Arnold found out that the FBI had changed her statement from seeing Oswald on the second floor to seeing him in the hallway off the first floor. "This doesn't make any sense to me," she told a journalist. Her testimony of Oswald calmly eating lunch just did not fit the narrative. There are many more witness statements as to what happened at the book depository and in the street, and many of them are contradictory or not very reliable. This has been discussed time and again, and yet no one can say with certainty what happened. So we'll move on to focus on broader aspects of the case. As you know, the Warren Commission said Oswald then killed Officer J.D. Tippit and later fled into a movie theater. This is only one story, though. There's another take on this tale, say the conspiracy theorists. The Warren Commission says Tippit pulled over Oswald at 1:15. They exchanged words. Tippit walked around the car, and Oswald shot him. Oswald hit him with 4 bullets, after which he took off on foot, reloading his gun on the way. The report says 12 people saw the shooter, and at least 5 made Oswald out in photographs at the station. Calvin Brewer, manager of a shoe store, also saw Oswald. He said he saw Oswald acting weird, and then he went into a movie theater. Julia Postal, who was in the ticket booth, saw the man sneak in, so she called the cops. The time was 1:45. Even so, Warren Butch Burroughs, who ran a concession stand in the theater, claims to have seen Oswald at 1:05. He didn't see Oswald enter the theater, but he saw him inside. Butch said he was 100% sure of that. He also said Oswald bought popcorn from him at 1:15, exactly when Tippit was shot. Again, it was as if there were 2 Oswalds. 18-year-old Jack Davis also saw Oswald at this earlier time. Davis said he was weirded out because there was loads of space in the auditorium, but this guy sat really close to him as if he was trying to be seen. The man then got up and went to sit somewhere else. He proceeded to get up again and went to the lobby. Davis said Oswald returned about 20 minutes later, although Butch said the Oswald he saw instead went to sit by a pregnant woman. Butch then said after Oswald was arrested in the theater after being wrestled to the ground, he was astounded. He said he saw another Oswald like a twin brother. One Oswald was carted out of the front of the cinema, and Butch said he saw the other Oswald being taken out the back. Bernard Hare, who owned a hobby shop, saw the commotion out in the street at the front and then went into the back of his store where there was an alley behind. Regarding what he saw at the back, he later said police brought a young man out, they put him in a car and drove off. That was all fine at the time for Hare, but years later he learned that Oswald was taken out the front, which he said he knew was wrong because he'd been there and seen he was taken out the back. Both Hare and Butch's stories seem to suggest there were 2 Oswalds, as does the story of police officer L.D. Stringfellow, who said in a police report that Oswald was arrested on the balcony at the theater auditorium, but he wasn't. He was arrested in the main bottom part. So, who did Stringfellow see being arrested? And who was the Oswald that the motor mechanic T.F. White saw around 2 p.m. who was wandering around a free man? The other Oswald by now was in a police station. White saw a car that seemed suspicious, a red Falcon. He took the license plate, PP4537. A man in a white shirt got into it, who White realized later that night when he saw the man on TV was Lee Harvey Oswald. But how had he seen him at 2 p.m. when he was apparently in custody at the time? White's wife said, "Say nothing, keep your mouth shut." Years later, a journalist got that license plate number. When he checked it out, it belonged to Carl Amos Mather, who worked for Collins Radio, a contractor for the CIA. The FBI then talked to Carl Mather's wife, who said Carl was very close to the deceased Mr. Tippit. It was she and Carl who broke the news to Tippit's wife after he was shot. 15 years later, Carl said he'd testify to the House Select Committee, but only if he was granted immunity from prosecution. There were too many coincidences, say the conspiracy theorists, too many connections, but the best one follows. The official timeline is further complicated by the story of Robert G. Vinson, who worked in the U.S. Air Force for the North American Air Defense Command, or NORAD. He saw the second Oswald too. He was on the same getaway plane as Oswald. Let us explain. Vincent wanted to go to Colorado Springs, which was home, so he went to Andrews Air Force Base and, as was customary in the Air Force, asked if he could hitch a ride on one of the planes. No planes were leaving, so he wrote his name and serial number on a sheet, so he was on the list to go next. He then went to breakfast, but halfway through it, he heard his name called on the loudspeaker. He was told a C-54 cargo plane was leaving for Denver. Great, he thought. The plane had no markings on it, and when he got inside, it was empty. He saw two men in overalls working on the plane, but strangely, they also had no markings on their clothes. Vincent was also surprised that no one asked him to sign the manifest, which happened every time he hitched a ride. When he was high in the sky, he heard a voice on the intercom say, "The president has been shot." The plane suddenly banked left and headed south. Soon in the distance, he was very surprised to see the skyline of Dallas. Two men in Dallas got on the plane, a taller man and a shorter man. He thought nothing of it until sometime later when he saw Oswald on TV, and he knew he was the shorter guy. Both these guys got off the plane when the plane landed again. Vincent later said, "I couldn't understand why they were in such a rush." Vincent later found out the plane had landed in New Mexico. He eventually got home, and sometime later he told his wife that Oswald had somehow been on his plane. His wife said he was nuts. He kept quiet about it for 30 years, and in all those years, despite immaculate service, he never got a promotion. Let's remember, he put his name and serial number down at that Air Force base. If the man really was Oswald, someone must have known Vincent had shared a plane with him. In 1964, Vincent was called in for what he was told was a special project. He soon discovered it was with the CIA. They put him through a series of psychological tests and then asked him to work for them. He refused, as he had still had his ambitions in the Air Force. It seemed in the end he had no choice. His bosses later told him he was going to work with the CIA at Area 51 on a Blackbird SR-71 spy plane. The conspiracy theorists believed that the CIA wanted Vincent close, working on top-secret projects and unable to talk about his job. Vincent later said that he wasn't dumb. He knew that this work meant he was being asked to keep quiet about his plane ride. He later said he knew the CIA would never let him out of their sights. The CIA, he thought, could have killed him, but instead they hired him. But in 1992, when Congress passed the JFK Records Act and Vincent was already retired, he contacted Dan Glickman, a Democratic representative for Wichita, Kansas. Vincent now knew under the new act he was able to talk. Vincent's story made the news, and later it became a book. Investigations showed that the C-54 could have landed about 5 minutes from where White had seen Oswald in the Red Falcon. So this is how the second Oswald got away, according to the theory. After JFK was killed, the first man to inspect the body was resident surgeon Dr. Charles Crenshaw, who was then working at the Parkland Memorial Hospital in Dallas. Jackie Kennedy was beside herself, he later said. She just recently tried to put her husband's brains back into his head. Crenshaw and the other doctors noted a small opening in the middle of JFK's throat, about the size of the tip of a finger. They'd all seen this many times in the ER. It was a bullet wound, an entry wound. There was absolutely no doubt about this, they said. They put a tube in Kennedy's throat as he wasn't breathing well, a process known as a tracheotomy. Crenshaw then looked at the empty cavity in the president's head, later saying that there was no doubt in my mind that the bullet had entered his head through the front. Still, on that day, the Secret Service took the body. This was not in line with the U.S. protocol. Coroner Earl Rose tried to stop them, telling them the chain of evidence meant JFK could not leave the hospital. The agents pushed him aside. They really wanted that body. As you know, the following autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital in Bethesda, Maryland, revealed something very different than what the doctors had seen. The conspiracy theorists say that the CIA's Alan Dulles made sure the doctors soon changed their minds and agreed it was possible that an entry wound could suddenly become an exit wound. There was one lone gunman, said Dulles, and you better make well sure you tell the story that fits that. Dr. Malcolm Perry changed his statement, telling a friend that men in suits had visited him. Secret Service agent Elmer Moore later admitted that he'd been told to pressure Perry. Moore said, "I did everything I was told. We all did as we were told." Crenshaw said in 1992, "We believed the medical truth would be asking for trouble. I was as afraid of the men in suits as I was the men who assassinated Kennedy," adding that anyone who would kill a president wouldn't think twice about killing a doctor. He wrote a book titled JFK, Conspiracy of Silence. He was subsequently smeared. It was reported how much money he'd made from the book. The Journal of the American Medical Association said in a paper that he might not have been in the trauma room that day. Doctors and nurses at least came forward and said he had, and that what he said was the truth. It didn't matter. Once he was smeared, there was always a shadow of doubt hanging over him, say the conspiracy theorists. Even the doctors that did the official autopsy were under pressure. They were told not to examine the throat. Navy Medical Corpsman Paul O'Connor was there. He said they were told to leave the throat because the wound was just a tracheotomy wound, not a gunshot wound. It got very tense, he said in an interview, later adding, "We were all military, we could all be controlled." Lieutenant William Bruce Pitzer, who was head of the Navy's audiovisual department, got something worse than a good old smearing, according to this theory. He worked on a 16mm film of the Bethesda autopsy. He saw everything. First Class Corpsman Dennis David saw Pitzer working on the film. They both knew what they saw, that JFK had without a doubt been hit from the front. David later said in an interview, "I can assure you, it was definitely an entry wound." He said it was inconceivable that it could be anything else. David assumed that Pitzer had taken the film. He realized later what he had seen would contradict the evidence that a lone gunman shot JFK. Pitzer had in his hands the most important footage in America. On October 29, 1966, Pitzer's body was found on the floor of the National Naval Medical Center where he worked. The FBI said he was found in a pool of blood with a bullet wound to the head. The .38 caliber pistol was lying nearby. His family said straight away that what the FBI said happened could not have happened. Pitzer was neither depressed or suicidal. We know from his wife and friends that he was thinking about retiring from the military and taking a new job. David said they were afraid that he would take the pictures that he and I had seen, the 35mm slides and 16mm film, that he would have taken them with him. Pitzer was thinking about moving to a major studio, so David said they'd be afraid Pitzer would have given them really this evidence to work with. Both the slides and the film have never been seen again. This allegedly incontrovertible evidence disappeared when Pitzer died. Naval intelligence went to see his wife, Joyce, after she died and told her not to talk to anyone. She kept quiet for 25 years. Even at 80, she said she was afraid if she spoke, they'd stop her pension. She'd actually been told something incredible, something darker than the dark side of the moon. A retired Army Special Forces lieutenant named Daniel Marvin had visited her. She said he told her in 1965 the CIA had approached him with an assignment. The job was to assassinate her husband. She always knew someone had killed him, but Marvin said he hadn't been the man to do it. He'd refused to take out anyone on American soil, but he was still telling her someone in the CIA had her husband killed. Marvin had been a Green Beret and later trained as an assassin at a secret training camp in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It was called the Special Warfare School. During that training, he and others were told that a perfect assassination of a government leader would consist of using snipers and setting up a crazed loon who could easily fit the description the public would believe. In fact, in 1966, the CIA asked Marvin to assassinate Cambodian Crown Prince Norodom Sihanouk and make it look like the work of Viet Cong. The operation was later aborted, but Marvin said his entire military career consisted of such black operations. He told Mrs. Pitzer that Colonel Clarence W. Pattern summoned him to the office one day and told him that he was to meet a company man. This company man asked him if he'd be willing to execute a man who was a national security risk. Marvin assumed this would be in Southeast Asia, where he worked before.
Work goes smoothly when you know the right steps. With Asana, you can coordinate tasks across teams and stay on track, so your team can spend more time celebrating wins. Try it for free at asana.com.
So when he was told the target was William Pitzer and he was in the US, he refused to do it. He said he would only do it if Pitzer were abroad. Marvin later said in an interview, it was common knowledge in Mafia and CIA circles that Green Berets were tapped by the company to terminate selected targets in foreign countries, whereas the Mafia provided the CIA's pool of assassins for hits in the US. Marvin was also in contact with Captain David Vanek. He said in interviews later that Vanek, who he'd trained with regarding assassinations, might have killed Pitzer. In 1993, Marvin went looking for Vanek, hoping that he would admit what they'd done in the 60s. He said when he contacted the Veterans Service Directorate, he was told Vanek did not exist. There was no record of him. That's when Marvin thought, they took him out too. But AARB found Vanek in 1996. By then, he was a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve Medical Corps. Vanek admitted to training at the Special Warfare School, but said he didn't know Marvin. He also said he couldn't recall a meeting with the company man and didn't know William Pitzer. An investigation showed that Vanek had worked for the CIA cover organization in Thailand from 1965 to 1967. As for Jack Ruby, while in prison, a doctor diagnosed him as psychotic. He'd lost the plot, apparently, even though according to documents discussed in Tom O'Neill's book Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the secret history of the 60s, Ruby was perfectly healthy and in a fine mental shape when he was visited just days before that diagnosis, and each time before that. How come he suddenly started suffering from psychosis? The New York Times wrote on March 10, 1964, "Mind expert says Ruby was insane." Anything he said now would be the words of a madman, which the conspiracy theorists said came in handy for some people. The man who diagnosed Ruby was Louis Jolyon West, a doctor who became notorious in time for dosing people with large amounts of lysergic acid dithylamide in his top secret work with a MK Ultra interrogation, hypnosis, and mind control program. One of the most outspoken people about JFK conspiracies, and apparently how ridiculous they were, was the prosecutor and author, Vincent Bugliosi. This same man threatened to sue Tom O'Neill when during the 25 years O'Neill researched his book on Manson, he discovered Bugliosi's famous book, Helter Skelter, was full of provable lies and completely missed the CIA's many connections to the Manson murders. It's just another coincidence that Bugliosi became a kind of spokesperson for the CIA and the US government in detailing how the conspiracy theories were not true. According to James Beard, who often played poker with Ruby back in the day, Ruby stored and shipped guns to rebels in Cuba for the CIA. The journalist Dorothy Kilgallen was working on a story about Ruby's CIA connections when she died mysteriously. She just had an interview with Ruby when she was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse, apparently from alcohol and sleeping pills. Next to her body was a glass with dust on it, as if someone had crushed some pills. In the CIA's assassination manual from 1952, in the techniques section, Part 3 describes how a forced overdose is effective and not easy to detect. Kilgallen had worked for 18 months on the JFK story, conducting numerous interviews. She said the Warren Commission report was laughable. She said she would shake up America with her story, and then she died. And according to the book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, her death had CIA written all over it. Jim Garrison always said Ruby was working for the CIA, not as an agent, but as a mafia asset, as many mafia gangsters back then worked for the CIA in return for favors. Ruby knew if he killed Oswald, he would be next, say the conspiracy theorists. That's the way it went. At 3 a.m. the Sunday before he did it, he called police officer Billy Grammer. Grammer later confirmed the speaker was Ruby. Ruby told Grammer, "If you move Oswald the way you're planning, we're going to kill him." Grammer later said that Ruby was trying to foil his own assassination job so he wouldn't end up having to do it, and so die himself. The Dallas County Sheriff's Office received calls at 2:15 a.m. and 2:30 a.m. from a man saying Oswald was about to be killed. Even so, Ruby defied reason when he was able to get into the police station and walk right up to Oswald. This should not have been possible, especially after those 2 phone calls. You've heard a lot today, and there's more to this story, but what you've heard is the general outline of conspiracy theory that has convinced many people to question the official narrative. The question is, are you now one of those people? The following is a story from one of our unfortunate writers. During the holidays, I traveled back home to see my mom for what I thought was going to be a fun break, but things turned a bit sour one evening when she broke some important news to me. "The Earth is flat," she announced, speaking in a serious tone, usually reserved for matters of life and death. "What on earth are you talking about?" I said to her. And again she told me the planet was actually flat, and all these years we've been lied to. The fact is indisputable, she said, immutable, incontestable, and she knew that because she'd been doing a lot of reading on the internet. "Okay," I told her, "state your case." This is how our conversation went. "Okay," she said, "firstly, you don't know that I'm wrong because you never observed the Earth as a whole. From where you stand anywhere on Earth, the world will seem flat to you. That's a fact." I peered out the window. She was right about that. Things did look pretty flat out there. Was the entire world just one big whopper? "So that's it?" I said. "Just because I can't observe the entire thing, it must be flat?" "No," she replied. "That's just my starting point, and stop smirking. This is deadly serious." At that point, an image flashed through my mind of my mother surrounded by men in white coats coaxing her to take her daily medication. "Okay," I said. "I haven't personally been up so high that I saw the spherical Earth, but other people have, and they have seen the Earth. You can actually see it rotating on its axis. We've measured the diameter of the thing, and it's approximately 7,900 miles, or to most people living on this non-flat Earth, 12,700 kilometers. There are images of this big ball all over the place." "All lies," she said. "Those books have been lying to you. The videos and the photos have been manipulated." She said the Earth is flat like in ancient myths where a turtle carries it on its back, and what we observe in the sky is not what we think. What encompasses the Earth is actually a firmament dome, she said. NASA has lied to us and is in on the conspiracy. But that doesn't mean all scientists know the truth, only that they have too bought into this spherical nonsense. She said during the Cold War, the conspiracy got going and billions of dollars were spent on space exploration. This money is still being wildly spent, and you, my son, are paying taxes and funding this rubbish. People have been getting incredibly rich because you take movies like Apollo 13 seriously. You're telling me Tom Hanks is in on the conspiracy? No, she replied, and don't get funny, you know what I mean. Okay, I said. I have one word to say to you. Seasons. Expand, she said, trying to sound scholarly. We have different seasons all over the world, ergo the sun's rays are hitting different places and they're making places hotter or colder. Those rays hit different parts of the earth, and so when it's winter in one place, it's summer in another place. If the earth were flat, all the earth would have is the same season all at the same time. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this. She told me that the sun just moves around the flat earth, so it hits certain places at certain times. She then went to get a plate out of the kitchen and began moving an orange around it. She said the sun and the moon were the same size, and she said the sun, that orange she was holding, rotates around the North Pole, which is actually in the middle of the flat earth. But Mom, I said, the sun is much bigger than the moon and that is observable. That orange plate thing doesn't really mean anything. I also explained to her that if this theory were true, then New York and Los Angeles would see the sun set and rise at the same time, which is not true. There is a time difference, so when it's evening in New York, it's afternoon in LA. How can that be? She told me I'm an ignorant fool, but didn't answer my query. This was quite strong language for my mom. It seemed to me that all those hours she had spent arguing online had made her quite intolerant to opposing ideas. Dare I say it, I was offended by her breach of familiar decorum. Okay, I said, once I unruffled my feathers. What's at the edge of this flat world, and why don't things just fall off? She told me that surrounding the Earth is a giant wall of ice, and that is Antarctica. Like Game of Thrones, I said, laughing. Should we fear the White Walkers? If you're not going to take this seriously, I won't explain further, she said sternly. Okay, go on. She said the sun was in fact not millions of miles away. She said it's actually only about 32 miles in diameter, and it hovers around the flat Earth at around 3,000 miles away. It acts like a moving spotlight, she said. So when it's above you, it's light, and when it goes away, it's dark. But it also moves closer to the North Pole in the middle of the Earth at a gradual rate, and then it moves outward toward the edge of the world. And that's why we have seasons. It's that simple. The thing is, Mom, if you use this model, the sun would never set. You can actually watch scientists making a model of your version of the events. It doesn't work according to how things are down here. Moreover, I told her, during the equinox, the sun rises due east and sets due west everywhere on the planet except at the poles. How could this be possible with your orange and plate theory? Sundials wouldn't even work, which would have been bad for people before we started using timepieces. Okay, please continue. You were also saying something about a massive ice wall? Allow me to retort, she said. She's a big Quentin Tarantino fan. What lies beyond the wall is the greatest mystery to us all. We simply can't get over it, and it probably protects us from something insidious. This wall holds in the oceans, and it keeps us from knowing what's beyond. In fact, this year we plan to sail to the wall in what will be one of the boldest missions humankind has ever undertaken. Okay, so who is going to be on that great voyage, I asked her. She told me it's headed by Flat Earth International, a group she is now a card-carrying member of. Mom, I intoned, I'm very surprised that there's this giant wall of ice around the world, and so far no one, and I mean no one, has ever photographed it. She replied that we have seen great walls of ice and that the rest of the border is made up of mountain ranges. That's why we can't just fall off the edge of the world. But why haven't the planes seen this edge, I asked her. She then went on about something called the Pac-Man effect, and like in the game, when a plane reaches the edge, it just teleports to the other side. She admitted that this was only a current theory and not the truth like everything else she'd said. This was now new territory, and those men in white coats were suddenly becoming quite real to me. And what about gravity? I asked her, to which point she said the whole thing is a hoax. Things just fall. She dropped that orange to prove her point, and amid my utter astonishment at her simplicity and undermining years of science, I wondered why on earth she ever sent me to school. She said under this flat earth there are magnets and they pull the oceans and change sea level. Maybe we should talk about the stars, I said. I told her that if we were on a flat earth, we'd all see the same constellations in the night sky. In real life, if you were at a certain latitude, you might see the Big Dipper, but if you were at another latitude, it wouldn't be visible. How's that possible? Going back to ancient times, astronomers saw the changes in the constellations and they knew the Earth couldn't be flat. How do people on different sides of the world see different night skies? She told me when we travel, we simply have a different perspective, so that when we travel away from things, they can become smaller and then they just disappear. But they are still there. That's why we can see certain stars in certain places. She said there's a vanishing point for stars just like anything else we observe at a distance. Mom, I said, I admit that I don't quite understand that in this context, but I'll just say that astronomers will tell you that certain constellations appear in the night sky at certain locations. Your vanishing point theory doesn't exactly convince me. And let's talk about the horizon. When we see things like ships float out to sea, they get farther away and appear to sink. We see less of the ship. Let's say the water was very calm. If the Earth was flat, we'd see that ship go out for a long way, and then it would disappear over the horizon. Then let's say we used an instrument to magnify that object, and we might see it, but see it seeming to sink. At some point, it'll disappear, never mind what instrument we're using because of the curvature of the Earth. If this place were flat, with a good enough telescope, we should be able to see everything in front of us, but we cannot. Explain that, dearest mother. Look, son, it's all about perspective and light refraction. The object is not going over the horizon, you just think it is. Weird, I said, since it's been scientifically proven. She had one word for that. Liars! Okay, so why, if other objects in space are obviously not flat, how come we live on a flat object? Hope you have a reasonable answer to that one. There is no reason, my child. Just look around you. That TV is rectangular, but the clock is round. The Earth is just different, just as all things have certain shapes. Well, Mama...
Is that better?
Deductive reasoning.
Okay.
One day
there we go.
The first square bird swim through a desert of marshmallow sand. Because, hey, there are no rules in this universe. Sarcasm.
Looks like I'm getting a yellow now. Okay. That might fix it.
The highest form of intelligence, I quipped, quoting Oscar Wilde. I then told her something else. I brought up a flight from Sydney to Santiago, Chile. This 7,000-mile flight takes roughly 12 hours. If the Earth were flat, it would take much, much longer. You can actually go online and track this flight. Is everyone lying about the flight time? On a flat Earth map,
let me know if that fixed it.
Calculate how long it would take, and it's been done, and it's far longer than if the world were a sphere. She just shook her head at that. Okay, she
okay.
So if the plane was flying around the Earth's curvature,
just had to change a few settings.
It wouldn't be horizontal all the time. So how come you take a spirit level on a plane and it shows it is horizontal most of the time? If you attach the world's smallest spirit level to the back of a housefly and told it to fly around a beach ball, that level would not read flat. Mom, that incredibly simplistic example has convinced me that we undoubtedly cannot share the same DNA. Let me just say, the Earth is not a beach ball and a plane is not a fly. I hope that's clear to you. She looked down at me like I was the idiot. I told her that planes lift into the air with their wings and this enables them to fly, which I thought was pretty obvious. Once up in the sky, the pilot doesn't have to make many adjustments to stay at a certain altitude. He might adjust the plane when he wants to reduce altitude, but this is very incremental. It's the same thing when you're traveling down what looks like a long, straightish road. You might be moving to the left, but it's so slight, only a minor turning of the wheel over some period of time has to be done. Imagine a housefly flying over New York. Does it have to go down on a downward trajectory to get where it wants to go? Exactly, she screamed. That just proves my point. I had to sit down for a second and hold my head in my hands. It wasn't funny anymore. I was no longer having a good time. She was totally impervious to the most basic reasoning. Okay, let's get back to the absurd stuff, Mom, because that's at least amusing. And I'm talking about the great ice wall that no man has ever breached. You have to wonder why the plane can't get over this wall, because there are plenty of aerial photographs of Antarctica taken from planes. Well, she said, maybe you just don't want to show us what's out there, so no plane is allowed to go that far. If it did, it would Pac-Man back, like I already told you. But we will get to the edge of the world, and that's why we're going to sail there on the Great Flat Earth Expedition. Okay, and you know the ship that they'll be sailing on will use navigational instruments that were designed on the scientific basis of the curvature of the Earth? Like, if the Earth were flat, you could just use 3 satellites and be on your way. But because it's spherical, you need satellites on the other side of the Earth. You do understand that, don't you? She scowled at me. But then that turned into a smug smile. Oh, you'll see. We'll get there, and all you deniers will be in awe at what we've achieved. Wait a minute, I said, and I went into the kitchen. I came back and passed her a plastic cake knife that we never use. You might need this, I said. It's dragon glass. That's just a made-up story, she said. I know, I told her. Let that sink in. September 20th, 2019. A mob of people gather at the site of the mysterious government facility Area 51. Today is the day. They're gonna storm the gates, get inside, and find out what's hiding in there. Is one of the greatest mysteries in American history about to be solved? I wouldn't.
So what brings you to my channel today?
Area 51 anyway. If you ask most people, it's the most secret facility in the United States. So secret that no one even knows what's inside. It's frequently believed to be where the government keeps classified things that aren't supposed to exist, including proof of extraterrestrials. Located in Nevada, it's just close enough to Roswell.
Wait, I thought I could have sworn I had my
flying saucer or two hiding inside.
Yeah, my chat box.
The government is keeping proof of
Where's my
aliens
chat
secret
box?
in Area 51.
Right there.
Often think that even the president doesn't know about it. Because, you know, one president would have tweeted out pictures of the aliens 5 minutes after finding out. But the actual truth is a lot more complicated, and it goes back decades. Area 51 is one of the most secure government facilities in the United States. How secure? Who's asking? The government isn't in the business of revealing the details about top-secret security measures, so we have no way of knowing who has access and who knows about this secretive site.
There it is.
What is known is that it's a complex network of government facilities located on the banks of Groom Lake in rural Nevada. There are a lot of bases in Nevada.
I do that sometimes too, so I appreciate the alert.
Cities, much of Nevada is federal land, and the wide open space makes it easy to conduct secret business. But we do know quite a bit. The only awareness
having random background noise does help out a lot.
Is the little bit we've picked up from aerial surveillance. It started out as a rectangular base of 6 miles by 10 miles.
What you working on? Fashion, architecture,
ranging 23 to 25
beauty,
miles across, connected
video,
to a larger road network in the Nevada test site, which was used for nuclear bomb testing long ago. Filled with security checkpoints, you'll get stopped long before you get anywhere near Area 51. But the surrounding area has become a bit of a tourist destination on State Route 375, with locals filling the small towns nearby with kitschy alien attractions. And it turns out the truth goes back.
Interesting.
But maybe not saucers. The source of the name.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I didn't expect that answer. I did not expect that answer at all.
Energy Commission numbering grid. It doesn't match with the rest of the system, but the number is so high that it was unlikely to be used. Maybe this was part of it being highly classified, being within the system but outside it. We know the early history of the site includes being used for lead and silver mining in the 19th century, but those mines eventually died out in the 1950s. And
let's say that's a very nuanced, well, not nuanced, nuanced be the right word. Very rare genre, I guess.
Developed unpaved airfield. But in 1955, the Cold War was raging, and much of it was going to be fought in the air. The CIA took over the land on the Groom Lake facility in 1955 and partnered with Lockheed Corporation to develop the Lockheed U-2, the strategic reconnaissance aircraft that would provide decades of key intelligence for the government. The aircraft was one of the government's most...
Hey man, ain't no shame in the game, man, as long as you're creating, right?
And Area 51 would deliver. Originally nicknamed Paradise Ranch, it soon played host to government workers and would become a reliable testing ground for military projects in the decades to come. 4 years later, it became the host for Project Oxcart, which specialized in anti-radar technology, aerodynamic structural tests, and other top-secret engineering projects. Much of this has since been declassified, and we know that multiple top Lockheed planes were designed here, including the A-12, a powerful Mach 3 plane that was the key to the 1960s spy race. And the government was gearing up for a long stay. By 61, the formerly deserted area
love how that came out.
Major military complex with multiple hangars and enough facilities to support a small population of workers. It looked more like a modern military base, but many of the residents were civilians and their families, so the government soon built other amenities like a gymnasium, a movie theater, and even a baseball diamond. No word on if there were any aliens present, and if so, if they got to play a rousing baseball game of human versus space invaders. A diagram from 1966 was declassified recently, and it shows us the details of how Area 51 was structured. Or maybe that's what they want you to think. So how did a simple military facility in the desert become a pop culture phenomenon? Part of it is the increased secrecy. As the Oxcart project began, the government started locking down the area. Entry was strictly regulated, and the nearby mine was closed. The government even created a restricted airspace region over Groom Lake, and top-secret aircraft were brought in for testing. Those who were in the area would occasionally see a massive stealth aircraft take off from the base, and there was an increased sense of mystery around the facility, and the mystery technology based there would only get stranger. Today, many of the United States wars aren't fought with soldiers, but with drones. These unmanned aircraft can track and identify a target and deliver a lethal attack without putting any soldiers in danger. Some are controlled by soldiers back at base in a process similar to video games, while others are programmed and sent into the field autonomously. And the process to make these high-tech aircraft possible began, you guessed it, at Area 51. And one of the most interesting projects in the 1960s was an unmanned aircraft that would be mounted to the back of a plane and launched from there. But some of the most classified technology at the base wasn't American at all. There was no bigger prize for a government during the Cold War than to capture an enemy aircraft. When Soviet-built aircraft wound up in U.S. hands, they were often brought back to Groom Lake for testing and breakdown, so the U.S. could gain knowledge on how to counter these weapons if a war ever began. Most famously, in 1966, an Iraqi fighter pilot was ordered to bomb civilian Kurd villages, and once he got those orders, he used a training flight to fly to Israel seeking refuge. The Israelis gave him sanctuary, smuggled his family out
I love
of Iraq,
this.
and turned his Soviet-built
I love this.
fighter over to the
I
government,
love this.
after which it was flown at Groom Lake, and the success of the site would continue. Lockheed continued developing aircrafts at the site for the duration of the Cold War, making it the top testing facility for the government. However, it wasn't suitable for operations due to its size, so some testing would move over to nearby Tonopah, where a large airbase was developed. While the military moved many of its operations there, more classified tests continued at Area 51. The Cold War eventually ended, and things at Area 51 became quieter, but they certainly did not stop. The government continued expanding the area around the base using eminent domain to take privately owned land in 2015 to boost its security perimeter, and the information coming out of this mystery site slowed to a trickle. So, where are we now? The U.S. government has always been cagey about Area 51, and no one's exactly sure what's going on there right now.
Time for a break. I have been looking at this screen for 2.5 hours straight.
Not just to road and foot traffic, but to civilian and standard military aircraft, with many security checkpoints along the way, including buried motion sensors and armed guards. Anyone trying to get in will be stopped before they see anything classified. The only ones that do get in regularly? The Air Force, using their specialized Janet fleet of aircraft. These private planes are used to transfer military and government personnel to classified facilities. And we don't know who's on these planes or what their business is at Area 51. And any attempts to get more information about Area 51 have been fruitless. Officially, the government map only shows the mine area as being part of Area 51, but declassified documents have shed light on the history of the area and revealed many of its Cold War era secrets. But the site is still as secretive as it ever was, and there don't seem to be nearly as many test flights as there used to be. Satellites have provided more information on the site, including showing runway markings, bases, and aircraft stationed there. Most details have come from the Freedom of Information requests leading to declassified documents, but the government is still keeping its secrets. In 1994, the government was hit by a lawsuit from a group of people who worked at Area 51. They were 5 civilian contractors and 2 widows of men who worked there and had since passed on. They claimed that they had been exposed to massive quantities of unknown chemicals that were burning at the site, and tests confirmed exposure to toxic chemicals, including dioxin. The claimants reported skin, liver, and lung injuries and sued both the Air Force and the Environmental Protection Agency. They had their day in court, and the government immediately petitioned to have their entire thing shuffled away under the state secrets privilege. When the judge declined, President Clinton quickly issued an order exempting the facility from disclosure in the lawsuit, and the lawsuit had to be dismissed due to lack of evidence. What is the government keeping secret at Area 51, and has it killed people? Whatever the truth is, every president since has extended this protective declaration annually, including arch political rivals like Barack Obama and Donald Trump. They all seem to agree that Area 51 should be kept under lock and key, which naturally has only increased speculation from civilians. It's kept highly secure, and trespassers find out the hard way that the government means business. In January 2019, a man crashed through one of the security checkpoints and was pursued by guards. He led the guards on a wild chase for over 8 miles before exiting his vehicle carrying an unidentified object and was promptly shot dead. Suddenly, Area 51 was in the headlines again, and decades of conspiracies were about to come to a head. So, how did a standard military facility become such a haven for conspiracies? The place is fairly secretive, but most classified government facilities are. The security is standard for military sites, and we might actually know more about the activities going on there than we do at other bases abroad. After all, most of the aviation testing has since been declassified, but that hasn't pushed away the conspiracies. It actually seems to have made them more intense. And it's not just one conspiracy. Somehow Area 51 seems to have become the one place where just about every mysterious rumor about the government takes place. So what makes Area 51 so special? For one thing, it is big, really big. It isn't just a building or a network of buildings, it's a massive swath of the desert, bigger than some towns, that's just been entirely locked down by the government for decades. We only know a little of the layout, but it's possible that the government has built underground facilities at the Groom Lake site that are much bigger than what appears on the surface. And if they have, it's likely a storage facility for military technology. But the theories people have come up with are much wilder. So is there anything to them? Many of the theories are really out there, with people bringing up secret programs like
Alright, we are back. Turns out one of my wolflings is streaming. She's probably not even gonna see this. I'm so hungry, y'all. Man, I've been working all day, all day. I think about time I do some gaming myself. Probably pull up Forza. I have to find my other cable. There it is. All right, my man. Have a good one. Thank you for popping through. So be sure to drop a what's it, follow or something. Whoops. Woo! Bright light. Which one of these was it? What a wonderful day. One of these is a loose cable. Here you are. It's you. Yoink. Oh, I appreciate it. Really appreciate that. I've been struggling to get my IG up, so I appreciate that. I really do. I just hit a wall when trying to get to 10K. I can actually. You said you followed me, so let me give you a follow back. Pixel. Whoa. These are good. I see what you mean. Very macabre. You do some pretty good portraits too. There you go. I'm follower number 3112. Huh. I definitely like this one. Ah, crap. I went away from it. Yeah, definitely like that one right there. Like that's cool. I'm gonna do one like that. My next shoot. Got one like on the first. I don't know who this Anavon Z person is that you've been photographing, but I need her in my book. She's super edgy and I love all of it. I need her in my book and I need her on my set. Yeah, I need her in my book. I'm gonna give her a follow. I need her in my book and I need her on my set. She got some skills. Halloween must definitely be your season. It doesn't matter. It's the edginess and the ink that I love. Oh. Yeah. Did Forza just crash? Oh, it's not up here. You know what? Probably if I turned off Lightroom. Appreciate it. Have fun at your shoot. Excuse me. Okay. Yeah, it just crashed. What is going on? Yeah, it just nah, bro. I'm gonna have to look up why it's crashing. Let's close that out. I don't have Logitech G Hub up, but I don't see how Logitech will be an issue here. OBS shouldn't have been an issue because I was on OBS before. You set your source to display capture. Well, it's on display capture. There we go. Fixed it. Mm. I still need to go to that Hot Wheels track.
Welcome back, Slipstream.
So I'm guessing that that was definitely that wasn't a solo. I should not have shot.
Whoa. I did not expect to see you here. It's been a long time, Ari. How have you been?
Turn around when it is safe to do so.
Uh-oh. All right. Whoop. Looking a little sideways there.
Welcome back to Pulse, and I know we've come a long way to Mexico, searching for new experiences, but Horizon, some things never change. Skill song, double scores for this next track.
Oh.
Hey Slipstream, I just got a notification. Ready to pick an adventure?
Well, I should probably cut her stream off, because that might be messing with me.
I know, right? There's Mexican car wrestling at Horizon, and I'm stuck up in the operations center. Adding it to your schedule. Turn around when it is safe to do so. Recalculating route.
exciting for a few minutes, wasn't it, Horizon? Yes, let's settle down and get back to exploring. I'll play another here soon on Pulse. Stay tuned.
Wait, what was that? Where did I put my thing to go? Oh, right, it shifted.
In 100 yards, turn sharp left. At the roundabouts, take the second exit. You have arrived at your destination.
Hopefully I don't get copyright struck for this music.
Immediately no. I'm telling you right now. This is one of those jokes that's definitely based in truth. So let's talk about this issue that most relationships will go through at some point. The biggest advice that I can give to anyone in this situation is nothing to do with what you should or shouldn't do. It's actually all about the perspective I think you should take. Because this needs to be seen as a couple issue, not a him problem, not a her problem. Instead, you need to remember that the both of you are a team. It is
What's up, sport?
You see what released today?
No, what was it?
GTA 6. Dad!
Huh? What?
I was just telling you about GTA 6.
GTA 6?
Mm-hmm.
How much is it?
$350.
God damn!
What are we gonna do?
Shit. I guess we pull out your college fund.
Deal!
Hell yeah, let's go.
Yes! Dad! It downloaded!
Oh, shit.
Got my beautiful Lexus LFA. Oh! Oh, I'm way in the back now. Oh no, this ain't happening. Oh, I messed that up. Man, they left me, bro. I was taking the corners way too light at the beginning. Oh, there goes my spoiler. Yeah, they got me. Oh, I messed that turn up. There we go. Catch him on the inside. There we go. There we go. I'm in my groove now. Oh, I missed that so bad. All I need is a podium finish. No, you don't. Oh! I was not paying attention. Cut that way too tight. Oh, I'm right on him. Too fast. Ah. Come on. Get around him. Fifth. All right. I went from 12th to 5th. So that's all right. 12th to 5th. Let's try that again. I gotta get a better line than them. That's the problem. If I can get a better line than they got, I can get them. Go back a little bit further. All right. Dang. All right, we got a nice, pretty much sharp 90-degree turn coming up. Oh, are you kidding me? Oh. Mm-mm. Jesus Christ. It would help if I actually paid attention to the map. Guys, you gotta keep cutting me on the inside. I'm trying to make a turn. Yeah, bitch. I don't think I'm gonna get them. I may have to switch cars. This Lexus may not be fast enough. That Lambo was on me the whole time, no. Jesus. I'll be nice. I'm gonna beat this race. I'm gonna try one more time on the Lexus, and if I don't get it, I'm gonna switch to the Supra. Jesus Christ, I thought I could get that. There we go. Come on. Come on. Ugh! I just have to pull away from me at those gears. There we go. We got a sharp turn coming up. Come on. There we go. Oh, lost my wing. God damn. That understeer is crazy. There we go. Come on. I'm at 6th place. Ah! Come on. I ain't gonna make it. Well, might as well. Alright, I'm gonna switch to the Supra.
You have arrived early, but the next Horizon Arcade event will begin shortly. Enjoy.
Wait, what? How did I get here? Oh.
Turn around when it is safe to do so.
There's a street race event going on. I'll knock that out. Okay, are we gonna go or no?
So, what's red and has 7 dents in it?
I have no idea. What?
Snow White's cherry.
Yo. Oh wait, how am I? I don't. Oh, that was a blueprint. Whatever. I was so confused.
So, what did you think? Hey, if we can get you superstars organizing event. For each other, I can go and lay on the beach.
In cool and dry conditions, perfect for racing, with a chance of snow. Okay, snow at high altitude. I did not see that coming. So who wants to blow off this whole driving thing and come sledging with me? Go on, I'm off to get my mittens, Horizon. You take a listen to this next track.
200 yards. Turn left.
Ow. Ow.
You have arrived early. Horizon Arcade will begin soon. You have arrived at your destination.
Alright. I'm tired. I think I'm gonna call it after a little bit. Oh, now you pop on. And I appreciate you from watching from the YouTube. You know what I'm saying? Give me that watch time. Woo! Ah! Way too much slide. Bye bye Pagani. Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's the type of slide I need. Get past this Conisec. Woo! Ah, too much slide. Stop. I don't know why I thought I was gonna be able to do that. Yeah. I'm not worried about making Twitch partner or nothing right now. We'll go back further. Oh. I just slid that whole way. How am I gonna hit this turn? There we go. At least I hit the turn. Jesus. Oh, that understeer. That understeer is nasty. Damn, we almost at the end of the race. Thanks for the slowdown, fellas. Yeah, that understeer is absolutely horrendous. Dang, 5th place again? Yeah. I was thinking about that. I just don't know, like, unless it's like up here above the camera. Man, that turn really screwed me up. Woo! Come on, there we go. Get in first. Yes! Caught him on the inside, baby. All I gotta do is maintain, maintain, maintain. Oh, you thought. You thought. All right, here come that big turn up here. Slow down, slow down, slow down, slow down. Ha! Woo! Almost screwed me up. Yeah, this understeer is crazy. Alright, full throttle, baby. Oh, you kidding me? I definitely missed that checkpoint. What? Yeah. That's definitely an option. I gotta adjust that steering though.
Mystery racer tearing up Horizon streets. It's you, Rob. Sometimes I miss being underground.
What do I get today? Good enough. I'm happy with that. I could build another car with it. A few cars, actually. Hey, Danny, y'all got snacks?
Hey, Slipstream. Guess who's halfway towards securing funding for our next adventure?
There's an XP port behind me.
Oh, sorry. Everyone thinks your driving is very impressive, too.
Got your stang ready. Better be quick or I'm keeping it.
Hola, amigo. I was talking to someone who found a classic car in a granero somewhere in this area. Would you be interested in restoring a pickup truck?
Ooh, a pickup.
Turn left. You have arrived at your destination.
Cheerio. Ooh, too much. Ah, missed the thing on. They're definitely gonna have the advantage of me in these turns. Reverse entry. Oh, he's in the crossbow. Where's the Winter Wonderland? Oh, I lost my wing.
100 yards, turn right. In 200 yards, you will arrive at your destination.
thought that was an in-game thing. I didn't realize that was DLC that you have to pay for. Personally, I feel like all of that should be included if you got Game Pass. That was not what I was supposed to be looking for. Oh, that's the one. All right. This sand is beautiful.
Turn around
I know I can hit 800. Still not it. 27 more feet for okay. Ah, I hit it too. I don't think that was enough. I was shot 13 feet. I need to hit at least 160 going off that ramp. That might have been it. That might have been it. Yup, there you go. Probably just enough to hit it. Oh. I still like tuning this car. Screw it. I'll go with the Peugeot. Does that tire have a Nike swoosh? It does. Dude, I was about to hit concrete. Get off me, nice. Well, that's my final race for today. It's funny because the highest tier car, I come in last place.
The freshest jar hits. Played all across the festival. Only on.
Alright, y'all. So I'm gonna call it for today. It's been 4 hours. I'm tired. And I still got more work to do. So thank y'all for joining me. Until next time, peace out.